Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Richard Beasley. Scott Davis, 48, relocated from South Carolina to Ohio after 15 years of work there. He sought a new job with higher pay to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. While searching, he came across a job posting on Craigslist that said, "We need someone to take care of a 688-acre property and feed the cattle. The position offers $1,300 per week, and you will live in a lovely two-bedroom mobile home. Older, single applicants are preferred, but we welcome all candidates. This opportunity won't last long, so please apply immediately." Scott was drawn to the benefits highlighted in the job listing. Eager to find a good job, he planned to contact the employer soon. After hearing back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the ad, Scott was quickly offered the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta, where Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi. They appeared to be genuine farmers, which made Scott feel comfortable and trusting. To earn Scott's trust, Richard arranged a preliminary interview with him. He proposed that Scott ride with him to the job site. They drove into a remote forest area where there was no cell phone reception. Richard suddenly asked Brogan, who was driving, to stop the car, saying that he needed to pick up some equipment for the farm near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott exited the vehicle. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest together. As they walked, Richard stayed behind Scott. Scott then heard a clicking sound and some mumbling from behind him. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood that he was the next target. Just as Richard was about to shoot, Scott quickly pushed the gun away, causing the bullet to hit his elbow. He then sprinted away while Richard pursued him, firing his weapon. Bullets zipped past Scott's head, and he heard trees and branches snapping behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the revolver aimed at him. He was unsure of his destination, having never been to this place before, but that didn't matter. His main goal was to escape from Richard. Suddenly, Richard shot at him, hitting Scott in the arm and knocking him to the ground. However, before Richard could take another shot, Scott quickly got back on his feet and ran. Blood flowed continuously from his injured arm. In an effort to evade the gunfire, Scott veered to the right and slipped between two large tree trunks. He descended a small, slippery slope and almost lost his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. Scott waved his arms to maintain his balance, ignoring the pain from his gunshot wound. He realized that falling could mean the end for him. As the ground leveled off and he began to run again, he heard the sound of a revolver firing again, right behind him. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away. When Scott broke through the underbrush, he paused, disoriented and unsure. Dense trees and bushes surrounded him, nothing familiar to guide him. The murderer was closing in, crashing through the brush. There was no time to hesitate, he had to keep running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard the revolver fire again. The reality of his situation filled him with dread. He sprinted but stumbled, sweat blurring his vision. His head spun, and a loud ringing filled his ears. Exhausted, he finally stopped by a small ditch, hiding behind a tree to listen for the gunman. Scott felt the fear radiating from him as he groaned softly. His arm bled heavily, but he felt no pain. As his heartbeat steadied, he heard distant dog barks and crows cawing. He strained to listen for anyone searching for him, but the forest remained eerily quiet. After a long wait, he believed he had escaped and felt relief, but it took him 7 hours to feel safe enough to seek help. He eventually found a house and called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. Scott recounted everything about the job listing, Richard, and the chase. He survived an 8-hour pursuit, but not all victims are so fortunate. He wasn't the first to apply for that job. Hundreds had been hired before him. In August 2011, a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger faced hardship, unemployed and living in a camp in Aiken, Ohio. In August 2011, Ralph faced difficult circumstances after losing his job and having to move into a homeless shelter in Aiken, Ohio. He was determined to rebuild his life. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he had moved to California to work with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and started his own successful business, where he hired workers and earned a living by renovating homes and taking on various odd jobs. Unfortunately, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he realized he could no longer afford his rent, which led him to seek shelter in a homeless facility. Ralph lost his apartment and faced difficult times, but at least he didn't have the added responsibility of supporting a wife and children, as he was a lifelong bachelor. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who he considered like a daughter, is 26 years old. They have maintained a strong bond since he hired her to clean his house many years ago. Ralph has always been willing to help his friends. In the summer of 2011, Ralph visited the library every day to search for jobs online. By the end of July, he excitedly shared with Summer that he had secured a fantastic position managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job offered him a free mobile home and a weekly salary of $300. Summer was thrilled for Ralph and felt he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph appeared content as well, expressing that this job was a great chance for him to regain his economic independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and encouraged him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without any updates from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to call him multiple times, but each time she only reached his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. Summer encountered someone else when she called Ralph's phone, which appeared to have been reassigned. Although she was concerned about Ralph, she didn't report him missing because she wasn't certain he was actually gone missing. Ralph had gone missing before but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who had faced difficult years. His marriage ended 2 years earlier, leaving him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting anew in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After his divorce, David found comfort in using his computer, often exploring various topics online. One night in October 2011, he came across an intriguing ad on Craigslist. In the Help Wanted section, he found a job listing for a farm caretaker to oversee a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. The position offered a weekly salary of $1,300 and included the use of a free trailer on the property. David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was curious and excited about a new opportunity. He thought taking a break from the city would be a big change, and rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, seemed like the perfect choice. Plus, having a free place to stay would help him save money. He responded to an advertisement and soon heard back. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, kept in touch with him regularly. On October 22, 2011, David called her. He sounded very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He talked about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David chatted for a while. Deborah wished her brother good luck and reminded him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, neither of them realized it would be their last conversation. Back to Scott's story. After Scott escaped a dangerous situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he met Richard and Brogan. However, they encountered a problem. A fire had damaged the surveillance room the night before, making it difficult to recover the footage. The news reported on a man who posted a job ad on Craigslist. Instead of offering employment, he lured his victims into the woods and murdered them. This shocking story attracted significant media attention. Meanwhile, David's sister, who hadn't heard from him in some time, saw the news and contacted the police. They quickly determined that David was another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest for clues related to an attempted murder of another victim, Scott. After 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and soon after, they uncovered a grave that had been dug for him. A K-9 unit was called in, and shortly thereafter, the dogs alerted the officers to something unusual. They discovered another body buried in the damp soil, which turned out to be David, who had been shot in the back of the head. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave with a body that lacked any identification. The sheriff's office in Noble County reached out to the FBI for assistance in finding out who had posted the job advertisement. They needed the FBI's help to trace the poster using the IP address and the advertisement's content. They determined that the job seeker was looking for someone very specific, someone who could vanish without drawing much attention. During interviews, if the applicant mentioned being married or having combat or martial arts experience, Richard would reject them. He was only interested in older men. He did not respond to any inquiries from women who applied. The victims, Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis, fit the criteria set by the suspect. Another man, Timothy Kern, a 47-year-old divorced father living with his 3 sons, also matched these criteria. When he accepted a job in Ohio, he had to leave his sons behind. Timothy responded to the advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after Scott Davis's incident. On November 12th, he visited his sons to say goodbye before heading to Ohio. After that, no one heard from him again. Once Timothy went missing, the investigation intensified. About 2 weeks later, the FBI traced the IP address of the ad poster to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. Joe claimed he didn't use Craigslist and that the ads were not his. He was unfamiliar with Richard but mentioned that a man had rented a room there. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner, which showed a local man named Richard Beasley. When Joe viewed the footage, he recognized the man, but noted he had introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. The police were unaware that they had discovered Ralph, the first victim of Richard Beasley, buried in an unmarked grave. They also identified Brogan Raffi as Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken to jail. So who was Richard Beasley and why did he become a serial killer? Richard Beasley, born in 1959, grew up in Akron, Ohio, primarily with his mother, who worked in an office. After graduation, he became a mechanic but had a criminal history, serving 5 years in a Texas prison for burglary and another 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio secretly, adopting a new identity. He created a facade of a compassionate man, pretending to be a pastor and going to church daily. However, his life took a turn when he became addicted to drugs following a car accident, and he eventually stopped working and lost his ability to earn money. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone in Richard's motorcycle group. Richard decided to guide Brogan by discussing the importance of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his preachy attitude, Richard was actually involved in shady activities. He found an apartment near the street where he sought out vulnerable people, such as homeless people and drug addicts, to do shady things. The police eventually caught on to his schemes, forcing Richard to create a new false identity. He then shifted his focus to targeting homeless and unemployed individuals to steal their money and identities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Brogan agreed to testify against Richard and reveal everything he had done. Brogan reported that he witnessed Richard lead Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, which was the same location where Richard later lured David and Scott. In his report, Brogan described the incident, stating that on a hot summer night, they took Ralph into the forest. He mentioned that he walked ahead while Richard and the others returned to the car and that he didn't join them. He recalled that suddenly, there was a loud noise, prompting him to go back to the car to grab a shovel. When he returned, he noted that Ralph was still there and that Richard had put Ralph's clothes and personal belongings into a garbage bag. Richard dug a hole that was about waist deep and roughly 4 feet wide and that they had difficulty placing Ralph's body in it. Finally, he added that they sprinkled lime over him as a sort of ritual. After Richard took on Ralph's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He found a job and took pleasure in his new life. Many of Richard's victims would arrive with most of their belongings in their cars, which he later sold. Scott Davis had mentioned that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview. Richard ultimately targeted Timothy Kern as his last victim. Timothy, 47, encountered the same job search difficulties as the other victims. He found a promising job opportunity, but it required him to move to a different location. Timothy was reluctant to leave his children behind. Since his divorce in 1997, he had kept a strong bond with his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. As a dedicated father and passionate baseball coach, Timothy prioritized spending quality time with his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their family connections through social media, particularly Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about an exciting job opportunity to manage a large 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing with all rent and utility costs covered, and a generous weekly salary. However, he was concerned about the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was apprehensive about leaving his family, the opportunity was too appealing for Timothy to ignore. He got ready to move on Sunday, although feeling a sense of sadness about being away from his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He spent valuable time with his sons before leaving the following morning. One of Timothy's sons received a loving message from him, but nobody realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different location behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were unaware of Richard's address, but they eventually arrested him. Richard didn't realize that Joe, the landlord of his rental home, had contacted the police, who then used Richard's IP address to locate him. As a result, when Richard called and messaged Joe, it assisted the police in tracking him down. He was arrested on November 16, 3 days after killing Timothy. Richard faces charges for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with numerous other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Raffi were tried in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan Raffi had the opportunity to accept a deal for a lighter sentence by providing information about Richard, but he chose to decline. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Although Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to refute the evidence against him when Scott Davis, a key witness and victim, agreed to testify in court. There was also substantial evidence from the crime scene, including personal belongings and identification of the victims found at Richard's home. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence clearly pointed to his guilt. Richard's trial took place later that year, resulting in the death penalty. He was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Pleas Court for resentencing, but the outcome was unchanged. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard appeared via video from the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was sitting in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks during the sentencing. Richard's other attorney, Donald Gallick, argued via video that adding multiple consecutive sentences was unnecessary for someone already facing the death penalty. However, Assistant Summit County Prosecutor Jack Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should remain unchanged. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common agreed with the prosecutors, stating that multiple consecutive sentences were needed to accurately represent the defendant's criminal actions. During the trial, Richard inquired whether he could reclaim a Celtic cross that had been taken during the investigation. He mentioned that the necklace had been passed down in his family and expressed his desire to give it to his newly married daughter, insisting that it was unrelated to the case. He stated that there was no reason for them to keep it, emphasizing that it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It was noted that it was ironic for a murderer responsible for taking the lives of many innocent people to portray himself as a caring father. It remains unclear whether his treatment toward his daughter was genuinely good or merely a facade intended to influence the jury's perception of him as compassionate and incapable of being the serial killer he was charged with being. His mother was there, trusting in his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, and the confession of his accomplice heard in court, Richard had to face the consequences of what he had done. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother stayed quiet and didn't say anything more. Richard appealed the decision but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has repeatedly asserted his innocence, but no one believes him. He is currently imprisoned at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard almost managed to evade capture, but his gun jammed, which allowed Scott Davis to escape. Had Scott not escaped and reported the incident, it's likely that the serial killer in the woods would have gone unnoticed, resulting in many more victims. The story begins with an online job ad that the victims responded to without thinking twice. The key takeaway is to be careful when you see job postings online. Make sure to research both the job and the employer thoroughly to protect yourself from scammers or dangerous individuals. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, to carnival workers Lester and Betty Likens. She was the third of 5 children, and her childhood was marked by frequent moves and financial hardship. Sylvia's siblings included 2 sets of twins, older twins Daniel and Diana, and younger twins Benny and Jenny. Jenny suffered from polio, which left her with a limp and weak legs, requiring her to wear a steel brace for support. Due to her parents' unstable marriage and nomadic lifestyle, Sylvia and Jenny often stayed with their grandmother, providing a safer and more stable environment. This arrangement allowed the girls to maintain a steady education despite the family's frequent travels. Sylvia began taking on responsibilities at a young age. She babysat, ran errands for neighbors and friends, and helped with household chores such as ironing. This allowed her to earn some money to buy things she wanted, and she often shared the money with her mother. Those who knew Sylvia described her as a friendly, confident, and charming girl with long, wavy, light brown hair that fell to her shoulders. Her friends affectionately called her Cookie. However, despite her outgoing personality, Sylvia was self-conscious about her smile because she had lost a front tooth due to a childhood accident while playing with one of her brothers. Sylvia often took Jenny to the local skating rink, where she would help her skate by holding her hand. In June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny lived with their parents in Indianapolis. However, their mother was arrested and jailed for theft in July. Their father, Lester, then arranged for his young daughters to stay with Gertrude Benesi, a mother of 2 daughters, Paula and Stephanie, whom the Sylvia sisters had met at Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude agreed to care for the girls as her own until Lester returned. After July 4th, Sylvia and Jenny moved into Gertrude's home at 3850 East New York Street. Meanwhile, their father, brother, and later their mother traveled to the East Coast for the festival. Gertrude would receive $20 a week to care for the sisters until November. At first, things seemed normal at Gertrude's house. Sylvia got along well with Stephanie, and they enjoyed activities such as singing along to pop songs and helping around the house. The Sylvia sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the other Benesi children, and Sylvia was praised by the pastor for her kindness and respect. Problems arose, however, when Sylvia's father, Lester, began to pay Gertrude late, often a day or 2 after the due date. These delays frustrated Gertrude, leading her to abuse the sisters. She began to spank their bare bottoms with various objects, such as a 1/4-inch paddle, and cursed them. As the late payments became more frequent, the abuse and beatings escalated. On one occasion, Paula reported that Sylvia and her sisters had eaten too much at church dinner. As a result, both girls were spanked about 15 times on the back with the paddle. This occurred just a month after they moved in with Gertrude's family, in late August. Gertrude's behavior became increasingly abusive, with Sylvia as the primary target. It is possible that Gertrude's jealousy of Sylvia's youth and beauty contributed to her actions. Over time, the abuse became worse, with more frequent beatings. Sylvia was often starved. They were given only leftovers or spoiled food from the trash. On one occasion, she was falsely accused of stealing candy that she had actually bought. On another occasion, she was publicly humiliated when Sylvia told Stephanie and Jenny about a boyfriend she had in Long Beach, whom she had met while her family was living in California. She shared stories of her time with him, including one in which she snuggled under the covers with him. Gertrude asked Sylvia why she did that, and Sylvia shrugged and said she didn't know. A few days later, Gertrude brought up the subject again, this time making a sarcastic comment about Sylvia's growing belly and hinting that she might be pregnant. Sylvia thought Gertrude was joking and joked along. However, Gertrude continued to make things worse, repeatedly mentioning Sylvia's interactions with Son and hinting that she was pregnant. The situation turned violent when Gertrude suddenly kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Gertrude's overweight and pregnant daughter, Paula, who was jealous of Sylvia's appearance, joined in the attack. She pulled Sylvia out of the chair and onto the kitchen floor, screaming that Sylvia didn't deserve to sit in the chair. In another incident, while the family was having dinner, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighbor boy, Randy Gordon Lepper, forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog filled with mustard, ketchup, and relish. As expected, Sylvia vomited, and they brutally forced her to swallow what she had vomited. Sylvia was so upset that she spread rumors at school, accusing Stephanie and Paula of prostitution. When a boy at school approached Stephanie with offers, saying that Sylvia was the one who spread the rumors, Stephanie confronted Sylvia when she got home. Sylvia confessed to being the one who spread the rumors. Then, in retaliation, Stephanie punched her very hard. Sylvia apologized and cried. Stephanie's 15-year-old boyfriend, Randolph Hubbard, found out about the incident and the rumors, and then violently assaulted Sylvia. He slapped her, slammed her head against the wall, and threw her to the floor. Stephanie's mother, Gertrude, also joined in, hitting Sylvia several times with a paddle. Daily life at Gertrude's house was a nightmare of increasingly violent episodes. On one occasion, Paula punched Sylvia in the face so hard that she broke her own wrist, concentrating her blows on Sylvia's mouth and eyes. Paula then used a brace on her arm to beat Sylvia even harder. The abuse the Sylvia sisters suffered was not limited to physical violence. Gertrude also abused them verbally and psychologically. On one occasion, she falsely accused Sylvia of being a slut and a prostitute, criticizing the immorality of prostitution and the degradation of women. Gertrude then forced her younger sister Jenny to beat her, threatening that if she refused, she would suffer the same abuse as Sylvia. The Sylvia sisters were abused not only by Gertrude's family, but also by Coy Hubbard and his classmates, who frequently visited Gertrude's home. They would verbally and physically abuse Sylvia, and often with the participation of Gertrude and her children. Neighborhood children also frequently beat Sylvia, using her as a punching bag in violent judo training sessions. They would burn her body, burn her skin with sticks, and cause severe injuries to her genitals. In one particularly humiliating incident, Sylvia was forced to strip in the living room and masturbate with a bottle. Gertrude would later tell everyone that this humiliating act was to show Jenny what kind of person her sister was. Over time, Gertrude banned Sylvia from school after she confessed to stealing a gym outfit from school. Sylvia had taken the outfit because Gertrude had not bought her clothes. As a result, Sylvia's education was disrupted and she was severely punished. Gertrude regularly beat her with a 7-inch police belt. The situation escalated when Gertrude changed the subject to premarital sex and then kicked Sylvia in the genitals. During this attack, Stephanie defended Sylvia, shouting, "She didn't do anything." Gertrude continued to torture her by burning Sylvia's fingertips with matches before continuing to beat her. A few days later, Gertrude used a police belt to beat Jenny several times. Jenny is said to have taken a tennis shoe from school to put on her stronger foot. As the torture and abuse worsened, Sylvia was not allowed to use the bathroom and was forced to wet the bed as punishment for her incontinence. On October 6, 1965, Gertrude took Sylvia to the basement, tied her up, and barely fed or watered her. She was often tied to the basement stair railing with her feet barely touching the ground. Gertrude's family would occasionally stop abusing Sylvia to watch their favorite television show. Sylvia's tragic ordeal even involved the neighborhood children, who paid 5 cents each to participate in her humiliation, beating, burning, and eventually mutilation during her captivity in the basement. Gertrude and her children bound and gagged Sylvia, then placed her in a bathtub filled with hot water, and rubbed salt into her wounds. After this incident, the father of a neighbor boy named Michael John Monroe anonymously called the Arsenal School to report that a girl with sores all over her body was living at Gertrude's house. A school nurse came to Gertrude's house to investigate, as Sylvia had been absent from school for several days. However, Gertrude lied to the nurse, saying that Sylvia had run away the previous week and that she did not know where she was. Gertrude attributed Sylvia's sores to poor personal hygiene. Gertrude also claimed that Sylvia had been a negative influence on both her children and her sister. The school did not investigate further, neglecting to check on Sylvia's health or whereabouts. In mid-October, Gertrude's son, John Banaszewski Jr., played a cruel prank on Sylvia. He offered her a plate of soup, but quickly snatched it away when she tried to eat it with her hands. By this time, Sylvia was severely malnourished. Gertrude allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs that night, but only if she did not wet the bed. Before going to bed, Sylvia secretly asked Jenny for a glass of water. The next morning, Gertrude discovered that Sylvia had accidentally wet the bed. To punish Sylvia, Gertrude forced her to masturbate again with a glass jar in front of Gertrude's children. Immediately afterwards, Gertrude yelled at Sylvia to go back to the kitchen. She then ordered Sylvia to strip. Gertrude told Sylvia, "You branded my daughter, now I will brand you." Using a hot needle, Gertrude began carving the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach. While Gertrude was still carving, she told 14-year-old Richard Hobbs to finish carving the words into Sylvia's skin. Meanwhile, Gertrude took Jenny to a nearby grocery store. Richard continued carving the words into Sylvia's stomach as she gritted her teeth and groaned in pain. Later, Richard and 10-year-old Shirley took Sylvia into the basement. They tried to burn the letter "Des" under Sylvia's left breast with an anchor bolt. The resulting deep burned scar looked like the number 3. That terrible night, Sylvia confided in her younger sister Jenny, saying that she was sure she would die from the unbearable abuse. The next day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter, the contents to fool her parents into thinking that Sylvia had run away from Gertrude's house. The letter was intended to falsely accuse a group of local boys of mistreating and harming Sylvia, claiming that she had initially consented to sexual intercourse with them. After the letter was written, Gertrude planned to have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, take her to a nearby wooded area called Jimmy Woods, and leave her for dead. However, this plan was not immediately carried out. Instead, Sylvia was tied to the railing of the basement stairs. Gertrude offered her biscuits, but Sylvia refused, offering to give them to the dog. Angered, Gertrude stuffed the biscuits into Sylvia's mouth, and she and her son John began to beat Sylvia savagely, aiming for her stomach. On October 26th, Sylvia's condition worsened. She had difficulty speaking and could no longer move her limbs properly. Gertrude took her into the kitchen, pressed her against the wall, and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk, but Sylvia was unable to hold the glass of milk properly. Gertrude became frustrated and assaulted Sylvia. After being thrown to the floor and returned to the basement, Sylvia became delirious, moaning and mumbling continuously. When Paula asked her to recite the alphabet, Sylvia could not read past the first 4 letters, indicating that her cognitive abilities were severely impaired. She was also unable to get up from the floor. That afternoon, a group of neighborhood tormentors gathered in the basement, and Sylvia attempted to identify them, waving her arms and shouting names. However, her efforts were hampered by her increasingly deteriorating physical and mental condition. After being repeatedly abused, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement but collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the stairs. As a result, she faced severe punishment. Gertrude hit Sylvia hard on the head, knocking her unconscious, then stood there watching her for a while. At 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs arrived at Gertrude's house and went straight to the basement. There, he found Stephanie crying, holding Sylvia's weak and badly injured body. Her mother Gertrude instructed Stephanie to clean Sylvia, but Stephanie and Richard decided instead to bathe Sylvia with warm soapy water and dress her in clean clothes. After bathing, they placed Sylvia on a mattress in one of the bedrooms. In her final moments, Sylvia expressed her final wishes, to be with her father or at least taken home. After enduring severe punishment and weakened by lack of food, she eventually died from her injuries. When Stephanie discovered that Sylvia was no longer breathing, she attempted to revive her with artificial respiration. Meanwhile, Gertrude claimed that Sylvia had been faking her death. Initially, Gertrude beat Sylvia's body with a book. When Sylvia was found dead, Gertrude panicked and ordered Richard Hobbs to call the police from a nearby pay phone. When the police arrived at the address around 6:30 p.m., Gertrude led them to the bedroom, where they found Sylvia's badly beaten and mutilated body on a dirty mattress. Gertrude gave the police a letter that Sylvia had been forced to write. Gertrude claimed that she had cared for Sylvia for more than an hour before her death and had applied antiseptic to her wounds in an attempt to provide first aid. She told the police that Sylvia had run away with some teenagers earlier, but had returned that afternoon, topless and holding the note. Holding a Bible, Paula told everyone in the house that Sylvia's death was preordained. She then turned to Jenny and calmly said, if you want to stay with us, we will treat you like one of our sisters." However, Jenny was urged to say something to the police before they arrived. Jenny recounted the events leading up to Sylvia's death at the request of Gertrude's family. Jenny then whispered to the police to take them away, and she told them everything. Jenny Likens' official statement led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Banaszewski on suspicion of Sylvia's murder, just hours after her body was discovered. Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same crime on the same day. Gertrude and Coy Hubbard's 3 older children were taken to a nearby juvenile detention center, while Gertrude and Richard Hobbs' younger children were detained at the Indianapolis Children's Home. All were held without bail until trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia Likens' death. However, within a day of her arrest, she admitted to knowing the children and admitted that her daughter, Paula, and Coy Hubbard had physically and mentally abused Sylvia. Gertrude also admitted to forcing Sylvia to sleep in the basement 3 times after she wet the bed. When asked about possible causes of Sylvia's incontinence, including emotional distress and kidney injury, Gertrude was evasive. Paula showed no remorse and signed a statement admitting to repeatedly hitting Sylvia. She also admitted to other acts of cruelty, such as pushing Sylvia down the basement stairs multiple times. John Jr. admitted to hitting Sylvia and frequently abusing her with his fists. He also confessed to burning Sylvia with matches on multiple occasions and said that his mother had burned Sylvia with cigarettes on multiple occasions. Sylvia Likens' autopsy revealed severe and widespread injuries, with over 150 separate wounds throughout her body. She was severely malnourished at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, type, severity, and stage of healing, and included burns, severe bruising, and significant damage to muscles and nerves. In addition, her vaginal cavity was swollen and nearly closed, and the autopsy found that her hymen was intact, refuting Gertrude's claim that Sylvia was 3 months pregnant and the allegations of prostitution and promiscuity. Sylvia Likens' official cause of death was severe head trauma resulting in bleeding into the brain. The cause was a blow to the right side of her head. The doctor also noted that Sylvia's body had suffered severe damage from prolonged abuse of her skin and underlying tissues, as well as prolonged malnutrition. Sylvia's body was found and it was estimated that she had likely died within 8 hours of her discovery. An autopsy revealed that Sylvia had been recently bathed, possibly after her death, which could have affected the rate of loss of body temperature and the onset of rigor mortis. Gertrude Banaszewski, her children Paula and John, and 2 young neighbors, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were tried and convicted in May 1966 for the neglect, torture, and murder of Sylvia. After 8 hours of deliberations, the jury found Gertrude guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison. She was paroled in 1985. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. She later appealed and was retried in 1971, where she pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison. She was released from prison in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were convicted of manslaughter and spent less than 2 years in the Indiana House of Reform before being paroled on February 27, 1968. Indiana residents consider the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens to be the worst crime in the state's history. Sylvia died on October 26 in Indianapolis, Indiana, before her parents could return to pick her and her sister up in November. The sisters did not want to report the increasing abuse and neglect to family members or school, fearing that speaking out would only make things worse. Jenny, the younger sister, was threatened by Gertrude that she would be abused and tortured like her sister if she spoke up. Jenny was also bullied by neighborhood girls, who would taunt or attack her whenever she mentioned her sister's plight. Neighbors, including a middle-aged couple who lived nearby, saw signs that the girls were being abused, but no one dared to report it to the police. All those involved in Sylvia's torture and murder were sentenced to prison. Although some perpetrators do not serve full prison sentences, they will forever be haunted by the consequences and horror of their actions. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Buchanan family. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she applied for a job as an office manager at his company. At the time, Adam was divorced and raising his son, Nolan, from a previous marriage on his own. The cheerful and outgoing Molly quickly caught Adam's attention. Their mutual interests led to a romance that blossomed into a serious relationship, and eventually, Molly moved in with Adam. Molly became pregnant and their baby was named Gavin. Those who knew the Buchanans described them as a loving family of four. The patriarch of the family owned a construction company, and they purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California, a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood. The rustic cabin had no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, became actively involved in renovating it, and the family began visiting regularly. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department were called to a wildfire in Greenwood Township, located on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. When they arrived, they found that the fire had burned 10 acres of land, and while the cabin was still smoldering, it was completely destroyed. Fire department personnel found charred remains in the ashes. The fire scene was still intact, and at 11 a.m., firefighters contacted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. At the time, no one understood the severity of the situation. Firefighters suspected that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped inside the house. When they arrived, the rest of the house was still smoldering, making it impossible to check inside. They had to wait for the fire to go out and the temperature to drop. While investigating the house, police officers detected an odor similar to that of burning flesh. Police later found a human skull and a charred torso, indicating that a tragedy had occurred. Police called for backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived to thoroughly investigate the scene. It became clear that the small, isolated cabin was not the owner's primary residence, but rather a vacation home. A Dodge pickup truck and trailer were discovered on a plot of land near the cabin. Police obtained the license plate number to identify the owner, who may have been affected by the wildfire. It was quickly determined that the truck and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, owned by Adam Buchanan. He lived approximately 160 miles away, in Bonita, California. Police were unsure whether the person inside was Adam Buchanan or someone else. The name of the company owner provided police with their first lead into the investigation. The Bonita police were tasked with checking on the welfare of all members of the Buchanan family. They arrived at the address and parked in the Buchanan driveway, where they saw a white Ford pickup truck. When the officers knocked on the door, Nolan, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage, answered. He was surprised to see the officers in uniform and asked why they were there. In order to avoid alarming anyone in the house, the officers decided to first determine who was inside. Nolan explained that his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to their estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, and they were expected back that evening. According to Nolan, his father had left him in charge of the house. Police did not yet have enough evidence to confirm that the remains found in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information they gathered, along with the discovery of what they believed to be 2 human remains on the evening of September 13th, was enough to report the family missing from the El Dorado County fire. The following day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to the Nolan home to conduct more in-depth interviews and identify the victims of the fire. At the home, officers spoke with Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They mentioned that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, had been coming to the cabin to do repairs himself. The parents were very concerned because they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until that time. From their statements, officers learned that the home was equipped with a generator, but that there was no electricity at the time of the incident. There were also gas tanks inside. This led to two possible explanations: the fire could have been accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire had cooled, allowing police to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. Detective James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office reported finding new remains, which changed the direction of the investigation. Police discovered a skull fragment with a bullet hole. At that point, it was clear that a homicide had occurred, and according to the sheriff, it could no longer be considered an accidental fire. The remains were collected and sent for DNA testing. In the first set of remains, a bullet was found lodged in the victim's thigh. The bullet-riddled skull was identified as that of a child. There was now no doubt that the fire had been used to cover up the crime. Police initially focused on whether anyone in his profession might have had a grudge against him. They also looked into Molly's life to see if she had any enemies who might have committed the crime. When those leads proved fruitless, police began looking into Molly and Adam's marital problems, which uncovered more problems. Police discovered that Molly and Adam's relationship had deteriorated significantly over time and that at the time of the murders, they had been sleeping in separate rooms for some time. A diary belonging to Molly detailed instances of abuse by Adam. Witnesses reported that Adam had not only abused Molly, but also abused children. Molly's mother, Susie Slanker, expressed to police that she feared that the couple might seriously harm each other during their arguments. Although Molly did not end her relationship with Adam, she would occasionally leave with her son to stay at her parents' house, returning after a few days until the next argument. It was also revealed that the couple enjoyed hunting in the area near their vacation home. Since both were armed, the police hypothesized that during an argument, one of them picked up a gun and shot the other, then, realizing the seriousness of the situation, committed suicide. There was a notable contradiction. If the tragedy had been caused by a conflict between husband and wife, there should have been a weapon found near one of them. However, no weapon was found. The police thought that the weapon might have been destroyed in the fire, making identification more difficult. For 5 days, members of the forensic team meticulously sifted through the ashes of the house. Despite a thorough search, they did not find any weapons. At this point, the medical examiner confirmed that the DNA found on the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son Gavin. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds prior to the fire, and the angle of the shot made it unlikely that they had committed suicide. The absence of a gun suggested that a 4th person had been present in the home who had shot the Buchanans, prompting a complete reopening of the investigation. Police turned to the victim's 16-year-old son, Nolan. He told police that the family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. Nolan explained that his father had chosen to use the company truck instead of their personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because he had loaded it with rocks for landscaping near their country cabin. The truck was later found near the burned-out cabin. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, he explained, as he had in his first interview, that he needed to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. Nolan also mentioned that a neighbor was illegally planting trees on the edge of the Buchanan property, which led to frequent arguments between his father and the neighbor. His father would often demand that the neighbor stop planting trees and threaten to call the police. Nolan spoke about the difficulties of the family business, revealing that the company was facing serious financial problems. The company was downsizing, with only 5 employees remaining. According to his father, debts were mounting rapidly. The investigation identified a suspect, a neighbor. The main problem was that no one could identify which neighbors were involved. The police went door to door, interviewing homeowners in the area. This approach paid off when they found a man who confirmed that he had argued with Adam about growing an illegal crop. However, he claimed that the disagreement ended after a tense conversation and that he had an alibi. After confirming the neighbor's alibi, the police investigated the family's financial situation, as their business was struggling. On September 18th, police went to Adam's company to talk to the employees. Nolan's words were correct. The company was in dire straits, facing bankruptcy with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, several employees were fired. Several of these former employees were very unhappy about being fired, making them potential suspects in the case. This aspect provided an important lead for the police. Over the weekend, the local high school held a community cleanup day. Students worked to clear debris from a park located about a mile from Adam's construction company. During the cleanup on September 19th, they discovered a small wallet containing Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan's wallets and identification cards, hidden under one of the bushes. There was also a .22 caliber rifle nearby. Police were dispatched to the scene immediately. The county sheriff's office has since developed a new theory. The suspect may have used the rifle to kill the Buchanans and, to conceal the crime, removed their identification from the scene. This finding is significant because it suggests that someone traveled from Bonita to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the evidence and the weapon. This suspect is likely a Bonita resident. The location of the evidence near Buchanan Construction supports the idea that the boss was killed by a disgruntled employee. Police have sent the gun and bag of documents for analysis and are seeking a search warrant for the company's records and premises. During their search, police accessed a video surveillance camera located on the company's premises. Fortunately, the camera focused on the parking lot, not the company's premises. Surveillance footage showed the family had left town on Friday, so police reviewed footage from that day. They were surprised to see that Adam had hooked up a trailer full of rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had claimed. Police discovered that Nolan had deliberately interfered with the investigation. If the white Ford had pulled the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the Buchanan family's driveway. Police decided to interview Nolan again. Nolan repeated his account of the weekend, where he had been, and who he had met, but this time they also asked him about the movie he had seen at the theater and how he had paid for his shopping at the mall. When asked how he paid for dessert on their date, Nolan said he used his father's credit card. Police then obtained a search warrant for Buchanan's Bonita home, inspected his vehicles and reviewed his financial records. They found a Ford parked in the driveway, which they carefully inspected. They noticed red dirt on the tires, which matched the dirt found in Greenwood. If the Ford had made the trip the previous weekend or earlier, some dirt might have remained. Unfortunately, the fire destroyed the tire tracks near the cabin, but the accumulation of dirt suggested the car may have been in Greenwood recently. Officers tracked the bank card transactions and discovered that Adam Buchanan used his credit card at Taco Bell on Friday, September 11th, while traveling to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he was home, not with his parents, and had a credit card with him. Police went to the diner and reviewed security footage, confirming their suspicions. A white Ford was seen instead of a truck. When they searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt from September 11th showing 4 drinks purchased, not 3. Additionally, evidence at the scene of the fire showed the presence of 4 drink cups, confirming that Nolan had been in the car. The next credit card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Penn, about 30 minutes from the cabin. Adam's parents had alerted detectives to the bar, saying their son and daughter-in-law often went there after working on renovating the cabin. Security cameras recorded the moment the couple left the bar, and highway traffic cameras tracked their route. A Ford F-150 was seen heading toward the Buchanan cabin at 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and then driving in the opposite direction at 3:30 a.m. In the first instance, cameras captured Adam and Molly in the car. In the second, only Nolan was recorded. Hours later, on the morning of Sunday, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used at 3 locations owned by Bonita, Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to police that Buchanan had only one bank card. This information contradicted Nolan's accounts. At this time, forensic results showed that Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested in the classroom. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him and attempted to twist the story by claiming that his father had shot his family. He said his father had pointed a gun at him, and in self-defense he took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan maintained that it was self-defense, claiming that the fire and his subsequent lies were due to his panic and extreme fear. He explained that he had doused the house with gasoline and set it on fire to cover it up. The defense repeatedly pointed to Adam's abusive behavior toward his son and other family members to the jury. The medical examiner raised doubts about the verdict, noting that the gunshot wound to Gavin's skull indicated it was fired at a nearly 90 degrees angle. Nolan, meanwhile, claimed that he and his brother's beds were next to each other and that they were both awakened by noises and screams. At that point, Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at Nolan, who was able to push the attacker away. According to this account, the shot would have come from about a 45 degrees angle, which is inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution believes Nolan shot his younger brother Gavin while they were home alone, as their parents were at a bar. After waiting for their father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. The position of the bodies suggested that Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took his rifle, his parents' papers, poured gasoline over the bodies, and set the house on fire. He then went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her to establish his alibi. On July 13, 2018, a jury convicted Nolan Buchanan of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Haring. Jessica Haring was born on July 16, 1987, in Norton Shores, Michigan, to a humble family, and that included a sister. At 22, she had a son named Zahn with her long-term partner Dakota Quayle Dyer, and by 25, the couple was still together and raising Zahn in a rented home. Jessica worked as a manager at a local Exxon gas station near Lake Michigan, where she was well-liked by customers for her friendly nature. She often worked extra hours to provide for Zahn, and her ambition was evident in her diary entries, which expressed her desire to pursue a college degree in accounting. However, financial constraints prevented her from achieving this goal. Dakota, her partner and the father of her child, was unable to fully support their family, leading to disagreements, and their relationship was strained. Despite being engaged, their wedding plans were repeatedly delayed due to various circumstances. On April 26, 2013, she started the day by shopping at a nearby store around 3 p.m. and then drove to work. Arriving at 4:35 p.m., Jessica began her night shift at the Exxon gas station. As she began her shift, she was the only employee on duty that night. At 11:14 p.m., a customer called 911 to report a strange situation at the Exxon station. He had entered the store to pay for his gas but found no one to take his payment. The store was unattended, with the door open and lights on. The customer informed the dispatcher 911, "The store is empty, but there are 2 cars parked outside, mine and another one. It looks unusual." Police officers arrived at the Exxon gas station about 10 minutes after the call. They inspected the petrol station and found no signs of a struggle or disturbance. Everything was in order. Inside the store, police discovered Jessica's coat and purse, containing $400, and her car and house keys in the back room. A single drop of Jessica's blood was found near the back door. Police also found a cap from a Walther P22 semi-automatic pistol's laser sight and 2 watch batteries on the floor. The cash register was intact, with all the money still in it. The last transaction was recorded at 10:52 p.m. for a lighter. Unfortunately, the gas station did not have interior surveillance cameras. Jessica's pack of cigarettes was left on the counter next to the cash register, suggesting she had temporarily stepped away. Her car was locked and parked outside, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. She had mysteriously vanished. The police discovered that the gas station was unattended, so they contacted the owner and informed her. The owner then asked a nearby manager to come to the gas station for protection. The police also notified Jessica's family that she was missing. Her parents began searching for clues and called her friends to see if they had any information. One friend reported being at the gas station around 8 to 9 p.m. that day and said everything seemed normal. However, a fellow employee who arrived to close the station shortly after recalled a suspicious incident. Around 11 p.m., the employee and her boyfriend drove by the station on a motorcycle and saw a silver Chrysler Town Country minivan parked near the back door with its door open. They initially thought Jessica might be involved in a theft, so they kept watching. The employee saw a young man with disheveled wavy hair and an orange sweatshirt near the minivan. He repeatedly opened and closed the rear door before driving away. Further investigation revealed a surveillance video from a nearby building showing a silver Chrysler passing the Exxon gas station at 11:02 p.m. The police also spoke to Christian, who reported seeing the man in the minivan talking to Jessica earlier. Christian initially believed the man was just flirting with Jessica because of her attractiveness. A composite sketch of the suspect in Jessica's disappearance was created with the help of Christian, who had seen the man near a minivan. The suspect was described as a young male with light skin, dark wavy hair, a stocky build, and approximately 6 feet tall. 3 days after Jessica went missing, the sketch was released. In spite of, police received many calls, but no information was available that helped the case. A main issue in the investigation was the large number of silver Chrysler minivans in the United States. Specifically, in Michigan, there were 15,000 registered vehicles of the same kind. This made it difficult to identify the driver of the minivan related to Jessica's disappearance. Jessica Haring's boyfriend, Dakota, was initially suspected in her disappearance due to their frequent arguments. However, Dakota denied this and cooperated with the investigation, stating he was at home with their son on the night of her disappearance. Since Dakota didn't have a car, he couldn't have gone to her workplace, and his phone records confirmed his alibi. After verifying his story, the police excluded him from the list of suspects. Further investigation revealed that Jessica's friendly and outgoing personality helped her attract many admirers. Jess Ammerman, a 37-year-old married plumber, was one such admirer. On the evening of her disappearance, around 9:30 p.m., Jess visited Jessica at the gas station, confessed his feelings, and claimed he was willing to divorce his wife for her. However, Jessica rejected his advances. He then left the station, called his wife, and spoke with her for about 50 minutes before returning home. After undergoing a polygraph test and being interrogated and interviewed along with his wife, the police also cleared Jess Ammerman as a suspect. Rob Fallett, the brother of the manager at the Exxon gas station, where Jessica worked, was initially considered a suspect in her disappearance. Around 9 p.m. on the day she vanished, Rob visited the station and reported that Jessica appeared upset. When he asked her what was wrong, she shared that she was having family problems. Rob offered to let her stay with him, but she declined the offer. Fallett then left to go night fishing in a nearby lake. After investigating Rob's alibi, detectives discovered his phone records supported his claim and he was cleared of the crime. Search and rescue operations for Jessica were launched with helicopters, specially trained dogs, and thorough searches of homes, businesses, wells, wooded areas, and Lake Michigan. However, no leads were found, causing the case to reach a standstill. About a year later, in February 2014, a similar incident occurred in Michigan. A young woman with a similar appearance to Jessica was kidnapped and attacked by a man while walking home late at night. She was taken to his apartment, where she was attacked, and her life was threatened. The woman was eventually released after several hours. The suspect, 42 years old Brad Allen Mason. Mason was eventually found by police, but he resisted arrest, threatening officers with a fake gun. Then, he was fatally shot during the confrontation. Brad had a history of crime, including being convicted of kidnapping in 2004 and arrested for indecent exposure in 2011. In 2014, he lived in a dorm near the Exxon gas station where Jessica worked. Despite this, investigators couldn't find any evidence linking Mason to Jessica's disappearance. 2 years after Jessica disappeared, a similar incident happened in 2016. A young woman was walking home from a friend's party late at night when she got lost on a dark street. A man in a silver minivan stopped and asked if she was okay, offering to give her a ride. She refused the ride but asked to use his phone. The man agreed, but only if she got into the minivan. Once she was inside, he locked the door, said his phone was dead, and he pulled out his gun, asked her to keep quiet. Then he started driving. The woman was feeling extremely unwell and nauseated, so she asked the driver to roll down the window for her. She quickly took advantage of the opportunity and jumped out of the moving vehicle through the window, running to a nearby house for safety. The driver quickly sped away and escaped. The victim immediately called the police and provided a detailed description of her kidnapper. By examining footage from nearby surveillance cameras, the police were able to identify the license plate number of the vehicle, a silver Chrysler Town & Country. The investigation eventually identified the driver as Jeffrey Willis, 46 years old. Jeffrey Willis, a factory worker, lived a reclusive and humble life, with no criminal record. When police found and searched his minivan, they discovered a semi-automatic Walther P22 pistol. It was discovered that this pistol had been reported stolen by a coworker of Jeffrey some time ago. Jeffrey was arrested and taken into custody. Upon searching his residence, police found a collection of various BDSM items, including handcuffs, chains, ropes, gags, a vibrator, a video camera, and a bullet matching the Walther P22 pistol. They also discovered medical supplies and sedatives, which included insulin syringes with unknown substances and disposable gloves. Investigators found a diagram of the woman's body, with some parts marked. Upon examining his computer, several distressing videos were found, showing scenes of young women being kidnapped. A hidden hard drive discovered in a ventilation duct contained secretly recorded footage of Jeffrey's female neighbors swimming. Furthermore, on his computer, police discovered a folder labeled Victims that included 2 subfolders. The first subfolder was named after missing woman Jessica, and the second subfolder contained information about a murdered woman named Rebecca. Rebecca Bletch, a 36-year-old woman who suffered a tragic fate. Approximately 1 year after Jessica went missing, Rebecca was murdered on June 29, 2014. Rebecca had gone out for a run in the evening but never returned home. She was discovered by her neighbors lying on the road, with her clothing disheveled. Initially, it was believed that she had been hit by a car. Although Rebecca was unconscious, she still had a pulse when found. Emergency services were immediately called, but unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries before she could be saved. Autopsy reports later revealed that Rebecca died from 3 gunshot wounds to her back and head, along with multiple bruises on her wrists and legs. At the time of Rebecca's death, the suspect has not yet been identified. However, 2 years after Jeffrey's arrest, investigators uncovered new evidence linking Rebecca's murder to the handgun found in his small truck. Prosecutors alleged that Jeffrey had attempted to abduct Rebecca and bring her back to his home, but when Rebecca resisted, he shot her and fled the scene. Despite his denial, forensic analysis discovered Rebecca's DNA on a glove found in Jeffrey's residence. As a result, he was convicted of Rebecca's murder and received a life sentence. While serving his sentence, Jeffrey faced additional charges related to the kidnapping of Jessica, despite he consistently denying any involvement in her disappearance. Nonetheless, a review of his phone records revealed that he was present at the Exxon gas station where Jessica was last seen on the night she vanished. He then went to his grandfather's house, about 13 minutes from the station. When police arrived at that house, they discovered something surprising. Although the front door was secured with heavy locking, the police were able to break in easily. What they discovered was disturbing. In the basement, they found a large stash of cleaning supplies, including various powders and bleaches, that had all been manufactured in early 2013, around the same time Jessica disappeared. It was found that Jeffrey had been absent from his job on April 27, 2013, the day after Jessica's disappearance. Colleagues reported that his absence was unusual. When he returned to work a few days later, he had noticeable deep scratches on his face and hands. This has made people who know him suspicious. A woman who visited the gas station on April 25, the evening before Jessica vanished, contacted the police. She had arrived at the station late that evening and expressed her concern to Jessica about being alone at such a late hour. Jessica acknowledged her concern with a nod. At that moment, an unknown man inside the station overheard the conversation and reassured the visitor, saying, "Don't worry, Jessica has customers who look after her." The man then left the gas station. Despite the stranger's reassurance, the visitor remained concerned about Jessica's safety and waited in her car outside until Jessica finished her shift and headed home. Unfortunately, Jessica disappeared the following day. In 2016, the witness positively identified Jeffrey as the unknown man, recalling his presence at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Jeffrey had frequently visited the Exxon gas station, interacting with Jessica at least 15 times prior to her disappearance. Kevin Bloom, a 48-year-old prison guard and Jeffrey's cousin, was arrested. During questioning, Kevin's statements were inconsistent, ultimately leading him to confess. He revealed details about Rebecca's death that were not publicly known at the time, and also admitted to helping Jeffrey hide Jessica's body. Kevin described how, on April 27, the day after Jessica's abduction, Jeffrey invited him to a party at his house. When Kevin arrived, he found Jessica lying lifeless and bound on the floor. Kevin and Jeffrey wrapped Jessica's body in a sheet and drove to a forest, where Jeffrey had already dug a grave. They buried Jessica and then returned home. When the police asked Kevin to take them to the burial site, he had difficulty remembering the exact location. Despite searching the forest for a while, he was unable to pinpoint the spot where they had buried Jessica's body. The trial of Jeffrey began, even though Jessica's body had not been found. The prosecution presented strong evidence to charge Jeffrey with kidnapping and murder. They alleged that he had been stalking Jessica for a long time. On April 26, 2013, Jeffrey allegedly parked near the gas station's entrance, went inside, and hit Jessica on the head with his gun. During the assault, the gun's laser sight cover fell off, and Jessica's blood was flowing to the floor. Jeffrey then allegedly dragged she out through the exit, put her in the back seat of his car, and drove her to his late grandfather's house. Forensic analysis of Jeffrey's devices revealed that he saved photos and news articles about the search for Jessica on his computer. As investigators followed the case, they found that he used a password that included her initials and the date April 27, 2013. This suggests that April 27, 2013, was likely the day she died, one day after her disappearance. Jeffrey maintained his innocence, claiming he was at home on the night Jessica was kidnapped. His lawyers pointed out that there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime, and no DNA evidence belonging to Jessica was found in his home or vehicle. Jeffrey's defense team argued that Jessica had been struggling with serious substance abuse problems in the time before her disappearance, suggesting that her kidnapping might be connected to her involvement in the illicit drug trade. Despite his claims of innocence, Jeffrey was found guilty of murdering Jessica and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, he showed no remorse for his actions. Willis's cousin, Kevin Blom, was also found guilty of helping to dispose of Jessica's body and received a sentence of 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Years after Jeffrey's conviction, new information came to light that implicated him in an older, unsolved case. On October 17, 1996, the body of Angela Thorberg was found in Fruitport, Michigan, with her killer never identified. After further investigation, Ed Blom, a 1988 high school graduate and Kevin Blom's father, was linked to the murder of Angela Thorberg in 1996. However, later evidence suggested that it was Jeffrey who became a suspect in Angela Thorberg's death. It has been 10 years since Jessica went missing, but her body has still not been found. After her disappearance, a court battle took place over the custody of Jessica and Dakota's son, Zon. Jessica's husband, Dakota, sought custody, but ultimately lost the case to Jessica's family. Zon currently lives with his grandparents and relatives on his father's side. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Deborah Newell. Deborah Newell was a highly successful and affluent woman who had built her fortune through hard work and dedication in the interior design industry. After years of climbing the ranks, she founded her own design firm, Ambrosia, where she spent 3 decades pursuing her passion. Regardless her professional success, her personal life was a different story. She had been married 4 times, but each union ended in divorce. While she was a devoted mother to her 4 children, but her with an intense desire for a happier home life. A few years ago, her family experienced a tragedy. Her sister, Cindy, was brutally murdered by her husband, Billy Vickers, in March 1984. What's more heartbreaking is that their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy throughout the trial. As a result, Billy spent only a few years in prison for his heinous crime. Deborah was deeply affected by the tragedy, leaving her with anxiety and lingering fear of guns. Despite being encouraged by friends to purchase a pistol for protection, she was unable to bear the thought of having a gun near her, and she lived alone for a long time. Deborah prioritized her physical appearance and lifestyle. She invested significant time and money in skin care, makeup, and hair, and surrounded herself with luxurious items from brands like Chanel, Cartier, Denam, and Gucci. Despite her beautiful life, Deborah felt incomplete without a loving partner. John Meehan was born on February 3, 1958, in California. He grew up with his sisters, Karen and Donna. John's life was influenced by his father, who taught him dishonest ways. This led John to get involved in scams, deal with illegal substances, and often have run-ins with the law, ultimately forcing him to leave California in 1988. After completing his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Arts degree, John went on to join the law faculty at the University of Dayton. His striking looks, 6 feet and 3 inches, with hazel green eyes and dark hair, earned him the nickname Dirty John from his friends. He possessed a natural charm that effortlessly attracted women. After John finished his academic journey, he met Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist, and they got married in November 1990. Tanya was 25 years old, and John was 31. However, their relationship was built on lies, and John kept his family away from Tanya, telling her they were bad people. Tanya supported John's education as an anesthesiologist while attending medical school in Tennessee. She also helped him get his license to practice anesthesiology. The couple had 2 children, but their marriage began to fall apart over time. Tanya eventually discovered the truth about John's past from his mother and sisters. She also found out that John had been stealing pills from his patients and was addicted to them, which explained his cause of his short temper. Tanya immediately reported John to the police. After an investigation, John admitted his wrongdoing, but instead of surrendering, he left the state and went into hiding at a hotel in Michigan. However, the police found John easily and discovered him unconscious in his hotel room, surrounded by empty pill containers. An ambulance was called, but on the way to the hospital, John woke up, grabbed a medication, and jumped out of the ambulance. He was caught again and eventually sentenced to 6 years in prison in Michigan for resisting arrest and possessing illegal drugs. John spent just 17 months in prison. Then, his sentence was reduced and he was released in 2004. During this time, he met Deborah through online dating. John, then 55, and Deborah, then 59, had both decided to give online dating a try. Deborah was immediately drawn to John's profile, which pretended he was a divorced doctor and a Christian looking for love. Despite having a string of unsuccessful dates, Deborah was delighted to meet John in person. He showed genuine interest in her life and accomplishments, which made her feel appreciated. This was a refreshing change for Deborah, who had been disappointed by her previous dating experiences. John and Deborah's first date took place at a restaurant in Irvine, California, in October 2014. John's aim was to make a great impression on Deborah, which he achieved by sharing false stories about his past. He told her that he had worked with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq, had 2 children, and owned multiple properties. Deborah was captivated by the image of a selfless doctor who had dedicated his life to helping others. John treated Deborah with kindness and respect, making her feel like a queen. This was exactly what Deborah had been longing for, genuine affection. John's charming words left Deborah smitten, and she invited him to her penthouse after dinner. However, John crossed the line this time. After a few kisses, he tried to get intimate with Deborah, but she didn't feel comfortable, so she asked him to leave. The next morning, John apologized profusely, attributing his behavior to too much alcohol and an inability to control his emotions. This admission won back Deborah's trust, and their relationship continued to blossom. As their love progresses, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their 3rd date, he expressed his love for Deborah and proposed to her. She was thrilled with their connection and chose to overlook some red flags. One notable instance was when John wore worn and somewhat unclean medical scrubs to a charity event hosted by Deborah, claiming he hadn't had time to change. Despite this, Deborah proudly introduced him to her friends as her doctor, and they took photos together. Their connection deepened, and they eventually decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Jason lived with her in the penthouse. Jason was unhappy with the men her mother was dating, and in particular, she had concerns about John. Jason found it unusual that her mother, who had impeccable taste and favored designer brands like Gucci, was in a relationship with someone who wore dirty, unkempt clothing. Jason noticed him showing curiosity about the artwork in her mother's apartment, almost as if he was determining its value. After only meeting for 5 weeks, John convinced Deborah that they should live separately, and they rented a house on Balboa Island's waterfront for $6,500 per month. Deborah paid $80,000 up front to cover several months of rent. However, John opted not to put his name on the lease, citing tax complications as the reason. Deborah was deeply smitten with John and took care of all the expenses, covering everything herself. Unbeknownst to her children, she couldn't understand why they didn't approve of he. John shows Deborah concern for her by making her coffee every morning, helping her with shopping, and generally making her life simpler. Deborah believed that she had finally found her ideal partner and was hopeful that her children would accept him. She envisioned a future where they all came together as a harmonious family. Then, Deborah intended to introduce John to her younger daughter, Tara, who was known for being more laid-back and easygoing compared to Jason. Tara visited her mother, Deborah, and John on the day they moved into their new home. Upon meeting he for the first time, Tara felt uneasy due to his unfriendly behavior and lack of enthusiasm for the move. Despite Tara's initial doubts, she decided to give him a chance. However, her worries about John increased due to some suspicious signs. For example, John claimed to own homes in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, but he never discussed them going there to visit or moving there. He also didn't own a car. What's more, he spent most of his days at home, often playing video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to secretly go through John's belongings and stumbled upon a nurse's certificate with his name on it. Realizing that John is not the doctor he said he was, Tara confronted him about this. This led to a huge outburst from John, who became angry and began yelling at Tara for trying to ruin her mother's happiness. He insists that Tara will fail to separate them. Deborah just stood there, listening, and eventually, a big argument broke out and ended with Tara leaving the house. John took advantage of the situation to manipulate Deborah into believing that her children were only interested in her wealth and were waiting for her to pass away, thus they not wanting her to be happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's extremely religious mother, Arlene, visited. However, John's attempt to present himself as a religious man in front of Arlene backfires and leads to more arguments. Following this incident, Deborah sought the advice of a psychotherapist. They have advised her to set boundaries with her children and strive for a peaceful life, advice that she chose to follow. Deborah and John moved to Balboa Island, where they enjoyed dining at local restaurants and taking leisurely strolls while admiring the beautiful scenery. Although Deborah was incredibly happy, but she was still worried about John's choice of outfit. His wardrobe consisted mainly of old medical scrubs, loose-fitting and frayed pants, and worn-out shirts. Deborah, on the other hand, wanted he to dress fashionably and complement her lifestyle. He attributed his lack of finer clothes to having them stolen during his time in Iraq. To address this issue, she took John shopping and bought him a complete set of high-end designer outfits. In early December, John went with Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas, where they made the sudden decision to get married after knowing each other for less than 2 months. Deborah chose not to tell her children about this development. Around that time, a mysterious woman managed to get into John and Deborah's home. He used this incident to convince Deborah that they needed better security. He then set up several surveillance cameras around the house that he could control with his smartphone. He even put cameras in Deborah's office, where he could keep an eye on her activities. John's goal was to have complete control over Deborah. As time went on, Deborah started asking John about his family and life before they met. Every time she asked, he came up with a quick excuse or justification, even though his answers didn't quite add up. Deborah dismissed her doubts, thinking she had found the perfect partner. However, her children, especially Jason, were still wary of John. Since he didn't own a car, John used Deborah's, which led Tara and Jacelyn to investigate his activities. They installed a tracking device on John's car to monitor his movements. When this yielded no results, they decided to hire a private investigator to investigate further. The investigators' findings were shocking. John had filed for bankruptcy, held a nursing license but not a medical license, and had lived in multiple states, including Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. Furthermore, he had been in the Orange County Jail. When Tara and Jason shared these things with their mother, Deborah, she remained unwavering, stating that her love for John would not change, even if the things were true. In late March, Deborah received a letter meant for John. The letter was from a former prison inmate, but before she could read it, he hastily took it from her. Initially, he was very angry, accusing her of not trusting him. He later claimed that the letter was from a friend he was providing emotional support to. Deborah was uneasy about John's explanation, and her concerns grew. The day after discovering lies, when John's left for work, and she decided to search through his belongings. This search revealed shocking truths about he. She found out that he was a former nurse anesthetist who had become addicted to pain medication, which led to his arrest and the downfall of his career. What's more disturbing is that Deborah discovers that he is a scammer and has been stealing from women he meets online. As Deborah searched further, she found court records showing that John had a search warrant issued for his storage unit. When authorities searched the unit, they found a handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. This information was alarming. But what caught Deborah's attention was that he had multiple restraining orders against him from different women. The most unsettling fact, however, was that John had been released from prison on October 8th and had met Deborah just days later. Too overwhelmed by these facts, Deborah felt a mix of shock and fear. She realized that John was a violent felon who posed a big threat to her and her children. Despite the danger, Deborah decided to calm and waited for the right moment to take action. When John left for the hospital due to back problems, Deborah seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she quickly moved out of the house while he was away. During the process of packing John's belongings, Deborah discovered some disturbing documents, online comments from other women warning about John's manipulative nature. These comments described him as a skilled deceiver who used his charm and good looks to manipulate others. Convinced that John was unstable, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. However, John continued to message her, apologizing and asking her to visit him in the hospital. Feeling guilty, she eventually gave in to his requests. By June 2015, he had managed to persuade Deborah to reconcile with him. He offers a defense about the objects she found and confesses to hiding his past, believing she wouldn't care about it if he were honest. He admitted to lying about being a doctor to impress her and now begged for her help to turn his life around. Deborah decided to give her husband another chance and they moved to a new apartment in Irvine. However, her children were unhappy about the decision and did not want to see her. As a result, Deborah and John temporarily kept a distance from the children. In March 2016, Deborah had been trying to help John overcome his addiction for over a year, during which they had been married. Unfortunately, Deborah's entire family, particularly her daughter Jason, disliked John, and he doesn't like Jason either. The tension between them had grown so severe that John prohibited Deborah from seeing Jason. To make matters worse, John contacted Jason's real estate school, slandering her in front of the teachers. He also sent Jason threatening and vulgar messages, telling her that her mother didn't want anything to do with her. Although he appears to be recovering from rehab, the more cruel and aggressive he became. By April 2016, Deborah finally reached the limit of her tolerance. She wanted to end her relationship peacefully, so she started withdrawing money from her bank account to protect it. $30,000 was hidden in a lower drawer in her home. When John discovered the money, he claimed it belonged to him. And his behavior became increasingly aggressive as he had to accept the fact that their marriage would end in divorce. Realizing she needed to escape, Deborah took some personal items and moved to her friend Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, which had a secure complex with multiple surveillance cameras. She attempted to obtain a restraining order but was denied by an Orange County judge. John lived in another state and was doing no harm, so all she could do was end the relationship and try to move on. After they separated, John moved to one of Deborah's house in Nevada. Despite her ignoring his calls, he persisted in contacting her. On June 11, 2016, John made another move, aimed at getting Deborah's attention. That day, Deborah drove her Jaguar to work and parked it in the office parking lot. During her work hours, the car was stolen. It was later found about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline. The car had not been set on fire, it sustained minor damage. Security footage clearly identified John as the perpetrator of the theft. On the evening of August 20, 2016, Tara returned home from work and parked her car in the lot. As she stepped out of the vehicle, she was suddenly confronted by John, who approached her with a knife. He attempted to drag her back into the car, but Tara resisted and screamed for help. In the ensuing struggle, John tried to cover her mouth, but she managed to bite him. Tara, wearing heavy boots, used her leverage to kick John and knock the knife out of his hand. Seizing the opportunity, she picked up the knife and stabbed John multiple times, inflicting a total of 13 wounds. Her final strike was particularly severe, as it pierced his eye. A neighbor witnessed the struggle and rushed to Tara's aid, providing her with a towel to treat her injuries and calling the police. Despite his severe injuries, John was still alive when the paramedics arrived. A search of his car revealed evidence of his sinister intentions, including duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport, suggesting that he had planned to abduct Tara and escape the city with her as a hostage. John was hospitalized for 4 days to receive critical care, but unfortunately, his injuries were fatal, and he passed away at the age of 57. After his death, his body was cremated, and a memorial service was not held. Deborah and her children were severely affected by this. It took a while for Deborah to readjust to her normal life, but the memory still haunts her. She struggles with feelings of guilt for introducing a criminal into her family's life. As a result, Deborah has become extremely vigilant about her safety, carrying a stun gun and pepper spray with her at all times. She has vowed never to meet anyone online again. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Gretchen Harrington. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, but her family didn't stay in Pennsylvania for long. Soon after her birth, they moved to the small town of Buchanan, where her father, a pastor, obtained a job at the local church. Gretchen immediately loved this new town. She spends a lot of time outdoors with her sisters and her new friends. The town was incredibly safe, giving parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside until nightfall. The town of Buchanan seemed to be the ideal place for kids from a religious family to grow up. As a result, Gretchen spent a lot of time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, consistently earning top grades. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen's mother and newborn sister were set to return home from the hospital. 8-year-old Gretchen was excited to meet her new sibling. However, her father reminded her not to miss Sunday school, considering her perfect attendance record and high grades. Although Gretchen was hesitant, but she decided to attend church, taking her Bible along. Normally, she would have walked to church with her older sisters, but on that morning, they stayed home. The church was only a short distance away, less than a mile, so she didn't feel afraid to walk alone. The Sunday school lessons were divided into 2 sessions. First, the children gathered at Trinity Church, and after about an hour and a half, some of them, including Gretchen, were to head to her father's church. However, when the kids arrived at the second church at 11:30 a.m., Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was missing. Thinking that Gretchen might have stayed at the first church, her father called Trinity Church to check. David's wife, a Sunday school teacher and pastor's spouse, answered the call. She reported that Gretchen was not there. She immediately informed her husband, David, about the situation. He was surprised to hear this, as Gretchen had not been in attendance at his Sunday school class that morning. Growing increasingly worried, Gretchen's father asked David to contact the police while he began searching for his daughter. He drove along the route between the two churches, checked nearby streets, and reached out to the parents of Gretchen's friends, but she was nowhere to be found. Her friends were all either at church or at home, and Gretchen's best friend, who was David's daughter, hadn't seen her all day. The police quickly launched a search for Gretchen. As people learned about her disappearance, they rallied together to help find her. Since Gretchen's father is a well-respected local pastor, hundreds of volunteers joined the search, many of whom knew and admired him. The volunteers and police scoured the town and surrounding areas, including wooded regions and the riverbank. A police helicopter even assisted the search from above. Despite the extensive search continuing late into the night, but they still couldn't find Gretchen. The search for Gretchen continued to grow the following day, with even more volunteers joining To aid in the search, the police created and distributed flyers displaying Gretchen's photo and details about her disappearance to motorists and along roads. Despite these extensive efforts, the police were unable to uncover any leads or determine what had happened to Gretchen. As the days went by with no new information, Gretchen's disappearance remained a mystery, deeply impacting the town. In the past, it was common for children to have the freedom to roam the streets without adult supervision. They would often spend hours exploring the woods and swimming in the nearby river with no one watching over them, and their parents rarely worried. However, the recent disappearance of Gretchen changed everything, which sparked widespread fear and anxiety among residents. As people tried to make sense of what had happened, various theories emerged. Some speculated that Gretchen might have left home voluntarily, while others believed she may have drowned while swimming in the river. The most disturbing theory, however, was that she had been kidnapped. As a result, parents became extremely cautious, no longer letting their children out without supervision. One mother even went as far as cutting her daughter's hair short to disguise her as a boy. Overnight, the once peaceful town turned into a place of uncertainty and fear. Police have also questioned anyone who may be involved in Gretchen's disappearance. They gathered several new leads from conversations with witnesses. One witness reported seeing a girl who resembled Gretchen near the church that morning, approached by a green station wagon. However, the witness did not see what happened next. Another person shared a similar story, but described a white Cadillac approaching the girl. The police investigated these leads by identifying and checking the owners of matching vehicles in the area. Unfortunately, this did not yield any results. 4 days later, a resident of Westchester, a nearby town, contacted the police after finding children's shorts that matched the description of Gretchen's clothing. Investigators showed the shorts to Gretchen's mother, but she confirmed they did not belong to her daughter. From then on, there was still no progress in the case. The search operation was eventually suspended, and the focus shifted to the investigation. The police continued to interview witnesses and follow up on any available leads. However, as time passed, the chances of finding Gretchen alive grew increasingly slim. On October 14th, a jogger in a national park, approximately 20 minutes from Buchanan, noticed something strange in the bushes. Initially, he wasn't sure what it was, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human body. The jogger immediately reported the things to the park rangers, who then alerted the police. Upon investigation, the authorities determined that the remains belonged to a child. However, identifying the child to be extremely difficult due to the advanced state of decomposition. Investigators initially suspected it might be Gretchen, so they showed her parents pictures of the clothes found next to the remains. These clothes had been carefully folded. Gretchen's mother confirmed the clothes found belonged to her daughter, as she had made them herself. Forensic experts further the identification by matching the remains to Gretchen's dental records. The cause of death was determined to be multiple severe blows to the head, and the case was reclassified as a homicide. The body was so decomposed that investigators were unable to determine any further details about the circumstances surrounding her death, including whether she had been sexually assaulted. Additionally, DNA analysis technology was not available at the time, 1975, leaving investigators without any DNA clues to pursue. The town was shaken by the news of Gretchen's murder, leading to an influx of tips for the police. As concerns about a violent offender still on the loose grew, citizens urged authorities to swiftly bring the perpetrator to justice. As the investigation continued, authorities received numerous tips about suspicious individuals seen in the park where Gretchen's body was found. Unfortunately, these leads did not aid in the case. Investigators also thoroughly vetted nearby residents with a history of violent crimes, but this approach yielded no results. Several months after the body was discovered, the case came to a standstill with no new developments. In subsequent years, detectives would periodically reopen the case, thoroughly reviewing existing leads and tips, but to no avail. This was largely due to a lack of evidence. Even with advancements in DNA analysis, the police found no concrete leads. No foreign DNA was found on Gretchen's body or her clothes, leaving the case unsolved for decades. The investigation was periodically mentioned in the media, but public interest waned. Following the crime, parents in the town became highly cautious and protective of their children due to fearing another attack. This collective fear lingered for years, changing the lives of Brawl's children. Months later, a crucial piece of information came to light. A woman contacted the authorities to share her account and met with the lead detective to tell her story. At the time of Gretchen's murder, the woman was 10 years old and lived in Havertone, close to Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her older sisters, as well as other kids in the neighborhood. The woman often slept over at her friends' houses. One incident, in particular, stood out and was pivotal to her coming forward. While sleeping over at a friend's house, the woman woke up in the middle of the night to find the friend's father touching her. She then saw him quickly leave the room and was too afraid to tell anyone. However, the same thing happened again the following night. The next morning, she confided in one of her friends, who surprisingly revealed that this was a common occurrence. The friend's father would often come into their room at night. The woman immediately reported this to her parents when she returned home. But instead of contacting the police, they simply forbade her from visiting the friend's house again. This disturbing incident occurred just 1 week before Gretchen's disappearance. The woman shared a crucial piece of information with the authorities: the name of the man she suspected, David Zanstra, a pastor who taught at the Sunday school. However, her account didn't end there. She also shared a disturbing incident involving one of her friends, which happened a month after Gretchen's disappearance. This friend was approached by a man who tried to kidnap, but her friend managed to avoid the situation by refusing to get into his car. The man who made the attempt was none other than David Zanstra. To support her claim, the woman provided detectives with her personal diary from that period. In the diary entry dated September 15, 1975, she recorded a conversation with her friend, who had begged her to keep a secret due to concerns that David might cause her harm. With this new information, the police reopened the case. Upon re-examining the original case materials, detectives uncovered several suspicious details that indirectly pointed to David's involvement. Notably, it was he who initially reported Gretchen's disappearance to the authorities. The pastor David gave investigators a precise description of Gretchen's clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front studs and pockets. He also mentioned a white top and braided hair. However, David claimed that he had not seen Gretchen that day. This raised a question: How did he know what she wore, especially since his description's claim was later confirmed to be true after Candy's body was found, as she was wearing the exact same clothes he described? Further investigation revealed that the Sunday school classes were delayed by 50 minutes due to the pastor David's late arrival. This delay would have given him enough time to abduct Gretchen, kill her, dispose of her body in the park, and return to the church to begin teaching. According to David's initial statement, he drove some children in his van to Candy's father's church after the classes and only became aware of Candy's absence when her father said it out to him. A significant detail in the case was that David, his wife, and their 3 children relocated to another state just months after Gretchen's disappearance. Notably, David owned multiple vehicles, including a green station wagon that drew police attention. A witness had previously reported seeing a similar vehicle near the church on the day Gretchen vanished. Given these clues, detectives decided to interrogate David. At 83 years old and residing in Georgia, David agreed to speak with detectives at the local police station on July 17, 2023. When David realized the detectives suspected him of murder, he initially responded with denial, asking what evidence they had against him. However, the detectives revealed 2 key pieces of evidence: a woman's testimony about an incident at his house and allegations of him molesting his own daughters. David's demeanor drastically changed. As he realized his dark past was exposed, he stopped denying the accusations and, after 48 years of silence, he began to speak about the murder. According to David's account, on a Sunday morning, he drove his green American motor station wagon to Gretchen's father's church. There, he saw Gretchen walking outside and offered to give her a ride. Gretchen accepted, likely because their families were friends, and she was also on her way to his Sunday school classes. However, instead of taking Gretchen to the church, David drove her to a secluded park area. He ordered her to undress, but she refused and she asked to be taken home. David then hit Gretchen repeatedly on the head, knocking her unconscious. After Gretchen lost consciousness, David removed her clothes and assaulted her. He then drove her to another park and checked for a pulse, but found none. Believing she was dead, he carried her body into the bushes and covered it with branches. David then returned to the church to teach his Sunday school class. After he confessed, the police arrested him to Gretchen's murder and had him extradited to Pennsylvania to face trial. His arrest sparked a wider and more thorough investigation. Detectives suspected that David had assaulted multiple girls, and they strongly believed there were additional victims. The fact that he had been a pastor in various cities and states for decades led as it suggested he may have committed many more crimes. Because David was a pastor, respected by everyone, he initially was not suspected. However, with the truth finally exposed, detectives collected his DNA sample and began comparing it to evidence in unsolved cases. They also investigated unsolved disappearances of girls in cities where he had been employed. Investigators quickly identified a case similar to that of Gretchen. In 1991, 4-year-old Amanda Campbell from California, she vanished from her home in a quiet neighborhood without leaving any clues. Notably, at the time of Amanda's disappearance, David was a pastor in that same neighborhood. Although there is currently no evidence linking him to the crime, police have identified similarities between the 2 cases, suggesting he could be a suspect. David Zanstra, now 83, is being held in a jail in Cobb County, Georgia. He was denied bail and denied extradition to Pennsylvania, despite he filing an extradition request. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gabby Dulan. Gabby Dulan was born on December 26, 2007, in Scottsville, Kentucky, a small town with a population of just over 4,000. In Scottsville, most people know each other or know someone in every family. Like many small towns, here there are very few types of entertainment. Locals primarily focused on school sports, especially football. The local school had good fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they frequently held games and competitions. Participating in these activities has become a tradition for locals, especially when their children participate. Gabby's family was typical. Her parents had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The oldest son was a member of the school football team, while Gabby participated in cheerleading. In November 2015, when Gabby was 7 years old, their town was preparing for the biggest football game of the year. Their school team was about to compete against a team from another county. And everyone was excited for this contest. Although Gabby's older brother played on the team, but she liked playing with other children more than playing games. Gabby's parents originally intended to leave her at home with their youngest son, cared for by a relative. However, Gabby convinced them to let her join them. On the evening of November 14th, they went to the school field for a game. In addition to local people, many people from a neighboring county came to support their team. Once they arrived at the stadium, Gabby saw her friends and asked her mom if she could play with them. Her mom agreed but reminded her to stay on school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers, while she ran off to meet her friends. Gabby ran back and forth to her mom a few times. After that, she ran away to play again. At one point, she visited her dad, who was in the announcement room, and asked him for some money to buy snacks at the concession stand, then she running off again. Minutes later, Gabby's friends approached her mom in the bleachers, looking worried. Her mom noticed Gabby was not with them and asked what was wrong. The girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek, and Gabby was to find them. They had hidden in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabby never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot to find Gabby, but she was nowhere to be seen. They called her name and checked all the places they had been playing earlier, but Gabby had seemingly disappeared. They then remembered that Gabby might have gone to the bleachers to find her mom, so they rushed there. Gabby's mother panicked when she discovered her daughter was missing and quickly informed her husband. He hurried off to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother headed to the concession stand, where Gabby had wanted to buy snacks, to continue her search. While searching, the parents Gabby's encountered friends and shared the news about their daughter's disappearance. Concerned, their friends joined in a search for Gabby. They thoroughly searched the area around the stadium but found no trace of Gabby. Returning to the stadium, the parents Gabby's made an announcement over the loudspeakers in hopes that she would hear it, but there was still no sign of her. As the game paused and spectators returned to their seats, they continued to ask people if they had seen Gabby, and some offered to help search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. They walked through the forest but still couldn't find Gabby. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since she disappeared, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers quickly arrived at the scene, listened to the accounts from the parents and Gabby's friends, and they began their search. The local police department had little experience with serious cases like this, as child disappearances were rare in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario, that Gabby may have been abducted or harmed. The officers encountered a pressing issue: the suspected kidnapper was likely at the stadium, where a game was about to conclude. Realizing they had limited time before fans started leaving, which may include suspects, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. Police kept watch at all exits to stop anyone from fleeing. They decided not to inform people about the situation, to avoid causing panic, so as not to hinder their search. If people became aware that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl might be nearby, it could lead to chaos. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the surrounding area. They moved toward the baseball field and entered the woods. Deeper into the trees, they discovered a small creek where they found the body of a girl, later identified as Gabby. They called for an ambulance to transport her body to the medical examiner. A preliminary examination indicated asphyxiation due to visible marks on her neck. Furthermore, part of Gabby's clothes were also missing, making the police suspect that she had been sexually assaulted. Gabby's mother saw an ambulance near the woods and immediately thought that her daughter had been found in need of medical attention. She rushed to the scene, but was stopped by the police, who didn't want her to witness the disturbing scene they were dealing with. The police investigation had quickly turned into a murder case, so they decided to relocate everyone from the stadium to the school gym. The investigators suspected that the killer might be among the group, and they needed to identify the perpetrator as soon as possible. The investigators then informed Gabby's parents about the likely circumstances of her death. They inquired if the parents had any suspicions about the person responsible for this heinous act. Specifically, they inquired if anyone had made threats against the family or if the parents had noticed anything unusual. However, Gabby's parents stated they had no idea who could be behind this act. Then, detectives interviewing Gabby's friends to see if they had noticed anything unusual that evening. They asked if anyone had been following or watching them, but the girls didn't remember anything suspicious. Detectives also brought Gabby's friends to the gym and asked them to carefully observe the people present, hoping to trigger their memory. Unfortunately, this effort did not yield any significant leads. The lead detective persisted in his belief that Gabby's friends may have unknowingly seen the kidnapper. He suspected that they might have been hesitant to point him out due to fear. To aid their recall, he encouraged them to remember every detail from that evening. Eventually, one of Gabby's friends mentioned that when she hid from Gabby in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. Although the girl's memory of the man's appearance was limited, she recalled that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the ticket vendor, who confirmed seeing a man with a denim jacket draped. The vendor found this person's behavior unusual and suspected he was intoxicated. Although this new information helped, the police still couldn't identify the man. The police started questioning the people who had been at the game. As they did, it became clear why they were all being held there. They grew concerned, particularly for the safety of their children. Despite their fear, they cooperated with the police and answered their questions. To further investigate, the police cross-referenced the names of men present in the gym against a sex offenders registry, but found no matches. They also checked on sex offenders who had lived near the school, verifying their whereabouts at the time of the incident, but all of them had alibis. None of them had been near the school at the time of the incident. Several witnesses reported that they saw a man named Timothy Madden, he acting strangely near the women's restroom during the game. As a local resident, many people were familiar with him, but they stated that his behavior that evening seemed suspicious. According to these witnesses, Madden was wearing a denim jacket, which matches the description provided by one of Gabby's friends who also saw a man near the restroom. A witness who was a distant relative of Timothy reported that during the game, Timothy seemed distracted. Despite his younger son playing on the field, Timothy, who normally showed great interest in his son's sports activities, wasn't paying attention. Several other witnesses also expressed concerns about Timothy's unusual behavior, leading investigators to interrogate him. As night fell, many people had been released from the school. Before speaking with Timothy, investigators sought the local sheriff's opinion. The sheriff, who had known Timothy, doubted he was capable of committing such a crime. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children. When police went to speak with him, they knocked on his door, and he answered. The officers asked if he knew the reason for their visit, and Timothy stated he was aware of Gabby's murder, but had no involvement in it. The detectives then used a tactic to gather more information. They asked Timothy if he could explain why several eyewitnesses claimed to have recorded him talking to Gabby shortly before her murder, through videos they supposedly provided. However, the detectives had fabricated this information. Their intention was to provoke Timothy into revealing his guilt or new information if he was involved in the crime. Timothy initially claimed he had no knowledge of the events, but he quickly changed his story. He admitted to speaking to Gabby near the stadium that evening. According to Timothy, he had stepped outside to smoke when several girls ran by him. Shortly after, Gabby approached and asked if he had seen her friends, explaining they were playing hide-and-seek and she couldn't find them. Timothy directed her towards their location, and she ran off. The detectives found Timothy's rapid change in story suspicious. Furthermore, his account indicated that he had spoken to Gabby just minutes before her disappearance. Notably, at the time when they met near the stadium, there were no witnesses present, which could have provided Timothy with an opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives then inquired if Timothy could provide a reasonable explanation if his DNA was found on Gabby's body. He replied calmly that he had none. They also requested a DNA sample from Timothy and the clothing he wore at the stadium. Timothy agreed to both requests. However, when handing over his clothing to the police, they discovered suspicious stains on the pants, denim jacket, and underwear that resembled blood. When questioned about the stains, Timothy insisted they were just dirt and denied any wrongdoing. However, the police were skeptical and decided to wait for the DNA analysis results to proceed with an arrest. After several days, the forensic pathologist completed the examination of the victim's body, confirming that Gabby's cause of death was manual strangulation. The pathologist also determined that she had been brutally assaulted. A biological sample of the perpetrator was extracted and sent to the laboratory for further analysis. The day after the murder, something unexpected happened. An anonymous letter arrived at the police station, claiming a suspicious person had been seen at the game. The letter provided a detailed description of the person's car, including the make and license plate number. This allowed investigators to quickly track down the vehicle's owner, who was a student living about 30 minutes from Scottsville. When questioned by the police, the student denied attending the game and knowing about the murder. He claimed to have been at work that evening, and the police were able to verify his alibi. As a result, he was removed from the list of suspects. Despite this, the person who wrote the anonymous letter was never identified. It is unclear whether the letter was intended as a trap or a cruel joke, but it is clear that the student was innocent. Police quickly received additional clues. Several people reported suspicious behavior by a 16-year-old local boy. He had given conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the day of the game, claiming both to have been there and not to have attended. He also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. The detectives discovered that the boy was Timothy Madden's son. However, what they found even more alarming was that the boy had threatened his father with a knife just 2 weeks before the murder. The police wanted to question the boy further but needed his parents to be present. However, his mother refused to cooperate and wouldn't provide a DNA sample, leaving the police without any concrete evidence. As news of the police investigation into the Timothy family spread, rumors began circulating in the small town of Scottsville. Some speculated that one of Timothy's older sons could be a suspect, while others suspected Timothy himself. Gabby's parents were shocked to hear these rumors, especially since they had known Timothy Madden since childhood and were close to his family. Their children played on the same sports teams, and they would often sit together at games. Given their long-standing friendship, Gabby's parents found it difficult to imagine that anyone from their social circle could be connected to the murder. Following the spread of rumors in town, another incident occurred. The 20-year-old eldest son of the Timothy family began sending text messages to the police. He using profanity and issuing threats, insisting police stop bothering his family. He then was promptly arrested for making these threats. Further investigation revealed that there was an outstanding arrest warrant for him in another town, related to allegations of assaulting a minor. During questioning, the young man attributed his behavior to frustration over the accusations against his family. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming he was at his cousin's house in a neighboring town on the evening in question. He consented to providing a DNA sample, which was then sent to the lab for analysis. On November 20th, 6 days after Gabby's murder, her funeral was held, drawing hundreds of mourners from Scottsville and surrounding towns. Everyone came together to support Gabby's parents, donating to help cover the funeral expenses. Meanwhile, the lab finished analyzing the DNA evidence, comparing it to samples from Timothy and his son. The results were conclusive. The semen on Gabby's body matched Timothy Madden's DNA, and the blood on his clothes matched Gabby's DNA. Detectives attended the funeral and discreetly informed Gabby's parents about this. At the same time, police officers arrived at Timothy's house and took him into custody. However, Timothy still maintains that he is innocent. He said the blood on his clothes was his own, the result of a scratch from a fence. This contradicted his initial testimony to police, in which he had claimed the stain was mud. With the DNA evidence in hand, the prosecution took the case to court, seeking the death penalty. During trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer maintained his client's innocence. He raised concerns about the reliability of the evidence, citing inconsistencies in the timeline. Specifically, the lawyer argued that Timothy was at the stadium filming a game at the time of the murder. However, Timothy himself had previously told police that he saw Gabby around the same time. The lawyer highlighted that Gabby's body was discovered in a creek, yet when Timothy returned to the stadium, his clothes were dry. Additionally, Timothy's mother, who resided with him, reported that when Timothy came home, he was wearing clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution argued that the discovery of Timothy's semen on Gabby's body made all of the defense's arguments meaningless. This evidence firmly established that Timothy was involved in the case. According to police, his account of that evening contained some truth. It is possible that Timothy did leave the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was searching for her friends. Given that Timothy was the father of one of Gabby's friends, she would have been familiar with him. Gabby may have approached Timothy to ask about the whereabouts of the other girls. At this point, Timothy might have concocted a plan, telling Gabby that the girls had gone into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to take her there. Once they were far enough from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then go back to the match. The wait for Timothy's trial had been ongoing for 4 years, causing distress for Gabby's family. They were anxious for justice to be served and for the person responsible for the murder to be held accountable. However, the case was slowed down due to many administrative procedures, leaving the family frustrated and having to wait for many years. In 2019, the prosecution and defense started negotiating a plea deal. The prosecution proposed waiving the death penalty if Timothy pleaded guilty and accepted a life sentence. Gabby's parents supported this proposal, as the prolonged wait for the trial was taking a toll on them. They also wanted to avoid the emotional pain of attending multiple hearings. Although Timothy had consistently maintained his innocence, he eventually agreed to the plea deal and confessed. However, the terms of the agreement did not require him to disclose the details of his actions. He only had to admit his guilt. This was unsatisfactory for Gabby's family, as they wanted the perpetrator to take full responsibility for his crimes and provide a complete account of what happened to their daughter. The court hearing became heated, Gabby's father yelling at Timothy and Timothy's relatives shouting at Gabby's family. The judge was forced to intervene, calling a break and separating the parties. Ultimately, Timothy was sentenced to life in a maximum security prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of the Winkler family. Matthew Bryan Winkler was born on November 21, 1974, in Henderson, Tennessee. He was the youngest of 3 sons, with 2 older brothers, James and Daniel. Matthew's parents, Dan and Diane Winkler, were deeply religious and they raised their sons very strictly. It is worth noting that Matthew became a 5th-generation church pastor. His father, Uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler and great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. have all been pastors of the gospel. Matthew grew up in a respected family. His father was the head of the local preacher's school and was a well-known figure in their hometown. As a result, Matthew and his brother attended Sunday school and actively participated in church activities. Outside of church, Matthew excelled in high school soccer, with many believing he had the potential to become a world-class athlete. As the head of the family frequently traveled for his preaching activities. He was often accompanied by his wife and children. As a result, their children, including Matthew, attended multiple schools during childhood. Despite this, he was an outgoing and friendly child who easily made friends in each new place. When Matthew finished high school, his family was living in Austin, Texas. He was a charismatic person but didn't excel academically. Following graduation, Matthew attended Freed-Hardeman College and graduated successfully. During his time at college, Matthew began developing his pastoral skills under his father's guidance. He served as the youth minister at the Central Church of Christ in McMinnville. He was later appointed as the preacher at the Church of Christ located on 4th Street in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carroll was born in December 1973 in G Township, Tennessee. She was the elder of 2 sisters, raised by parents who were deeply devoted to their Christian faith. In fact, her father was a pastor at the local church, where Mary and her younger sister attended Sunday school. A few years after Mary was born, Mary's parents had a second daughter. She was born prematurely and had serious health issues, including cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and intellectual disabilities. This was very challenging for her parents to accept, so they looked for different treatments and even tried experimental therapy to help her. Unfortunately, none of these treatments led to improvements in her health. Mary loved her younger sister dearly and always tried to care for her with kindness and compassion. In 1987, tragedy struck when Mary's 10-year-old sister suffered an epileptic seizure while bathing. Mary had briefly left the room to retrieve something from the bathing accessories, and by the time Mary returned, her sister was no longer breathing. Despite efforts to revive her sister, but she passed away. For Mary, a 13-year-old girl, this was a big shock and the first loss in her life. She was shaken. Consumed by guilt and self-blame, Mary struggled to cope with her grief and she had a nervous breakdown. Mary teachers, concerned about her well-being, referred her to the school psychologist. The therapy sessions were very effective, but they did not last long. When her father discovered the therapy sessions, he became outraged and forbade Mary from continuing, insisting that family problems should be kept within the family. Unfortunately, Mary never received real attention from her parents. Mary grew up as a shy and modest person. After her younger sister's tragic death, causing Mary to become increasingly withdrawn and struggled with the emotional trauma. Her father did not allow her to seek help from therapists, which led to serious psychological problems over time. Years later, Mary's parents decided to adopt a young girl named Charlotte from a troubled large family. Shortly after, they also welcomed Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister into their home, reuniting the siblings. As the older sibling, Mary took care of the younger children and helped her mother. Around the same time, Mary met Matthew, who had just graduated from high school. He was charming, handsome, and popular among girls. However, his strict religious upbringing prevented him from freely expressing his romantic feelings. Despite this, Mary and Matthew quickly hit it off, which soon blossomed into love. As their feelings grew deeper and deeper, they decided to take the next step. After a few months, they introduced each other to their parents, who gave their blessing. With their parents' approval, Mary and Matthew began planning their wedding, which took place in April 1994. When Matthew's family welcomed their first daughter, Patricia, his college education was temporarily postponed. To support his family, he worked at a construction site, but he only did it for a short time because he was not used to hard physical labor. This was when Mary began to notice that Matthew had a difficult temperament. He would often get angry over nothing, become easily irritated, and have trouble controlling his temper. Mary, a gentle and quiet young woman, decided not to speak out about the issues she faced, and instead she kept her family problems to herself. Mary, brought up in a patriarchal household, she had been taught to obey her husband without question. Initially, the Winklers lived close to Mary's parents, allowing her to visit them frequently. However, their lives took a turn for the worse when Mary's mother, Mrs. Freeman, was diagnosed with cancer. The disease progressed rapidly, and she passed away within a few months. This loss was another blow to Mary. Now she has the responsibility of taking care of her little siblings. Mary's situation became increasingly complex during this time due to her second pregnancy. Following the birth of their second daughter, the family relocated to a new city where they purchased a small home. After the move, Mary became fully devoted to caring for her baby, which led to her nearly ceasing communication with her father and younger siblings. Their constant need for attention overwhelmed her, which further strained their relationships. Additionally, Mary struggling with severe postpartum depression. Those close to the Winkler family noticed changes in Mary's behavior and personality that seemed unusual and concerning. As an introverted person with sociophobic tendencies, she found it challenging to connect with others and form friendships. She gets upset easily, and any little thing can bring her to tears. During this period, as Matthew's career as a pastor progressed, Mary grew increasingly withdrawn. The situation further deteriorated when she became pregnant for the third time, and a few months later, discovered that the fetus had not survived, adding to her emotional pain. This news was devastating for Mary, who had been eagerly anticipating the arrival of this child. Several months earlier, Mary had been overjoyed when she finally became pregnant after a 2-year wait, signaled by the 2 long-awaited lines on her pregnancy test. However, Mary's happiness was tempered by fear, and she chose to keep her pregnancy a secret for a long time. Eventually, as her condition became more noticeable, people around her began speculating about her unusual behavior and private life. Those who knew Mary closely believed that her unusual behavior was due to the severe trauma she experienced in her childhood, which had taken a toll on her emotional well-being. Behind closed doors, Matthew and Mary's seemingly perfect marriage was far from ideal. Matthew would often shout and snap at his wife, Mary, for no apparent reason, much to the concern of their neighbors. Despite her efforts to maintain a facade of a happy marriage, the truth began to unravel when Mary appeared with a huge black eye. Although she claimed it was an accident, rumors quickly spread about the pastor's violent behavior towards his wife. The tension in their relationship worsened when Matthew had a growing desire to try new things in the bedroom, and he suggested to his wife that they experiment with role-playing, adult toys, and other activities. However, these ideas were met with strong disapproval from Mary. She had been raised in a conservative and strict family, found these ideas to be completely unacceptable. As a result, she firmly told Matthew that she would not engage in such activities. This led to Matthew becoming angry and frustrated, and he repeatedly attempted to force Mary to give in to his desires. The situation became increasingly unbearable for Mary, who suffered abuse from her husband in the bedroom. She eventually confided in her closest friend, tearfully sharing her struggles and asking for kept confidential. Unfortunately, her friend knew the promise and instead shared the information with others. The incident led to widespread rumors about the pastor's behavior, Matthew, damaging his reputation within the community. At that time, Matthew is being promoted and desires to become a local church leader. Nevertheless, his aspirations were dashed due to the swift spread of unflattering rumors about him. Matthew suffered further consequences, was dismissed from Sunday school, where he had previously been in good standing and had successfully taught God's word to the children. The decision this him was prompted by complaints from parents who had also heard about the pastor's strange hobbies. Matthew. As a result, the family Matthew had to move house there and relocate to a different city in search of a fresh start. They eventually settled in Selmer, where soon gained the affection and respect of the people around them. Matthew resumed his role as a church pastor, while his wife, Mary, took on a part-time job to help supplement the family's income. Although their family is not yet peaceful, Mary and Matthew presented themselves as an ideal couple, making their family seem like a model to their neighbors and church congregation. They had become close friends with a young married couple who lived next door, often visiting and sharing holidays, news, and secrets. A few months before the tragedy happened, during a dinner at their house, Mary proudly told their friends that Matthew had bought her a gun for self-defense. He had already taken her to the shooting range several times to teach her how to use it. Mary turned out to be a quick learner, mastering the skills and accurately hitting her targets. It was discovered that the Winkler already had firearms in their home. These guns had been previously purchased by Matthew for self-defense. The guests found it puzzling that he and Mary needed so many firearms, given that they lived in a peaceful town where they had no known enemies and were well respected by their everyone. Mary and Matthew faced financial difficulties after moving to a new house. Mary began looking for part-time work and also pursued a medical degree in order to secure a job at a clinic and care for sick children. Mary then decided to commit financial fraud in an attempt to improve her family's financial situation. She claimed she didn't realize her actions were illegal and intended to repay the money once her finances improved. Specifically, she inflated her bank accounts by adding false funds. Mary received checks from unknown sources, totaling almost $177,000, and deposited them into a joint account with her husband. Her substantial deposits caught the attention of bank employees, and they invited Mary and Matthew to the bank branch to discuss and clarify the transactions. Mary and Matthew failed to appear at the bank, which heightened the suspicions. It was initially assumed that Matthew was unaware of his wife's actions. On March 22, 2006, the quiet town of Selmer, Tennessee, was shaken by a shocking crime. The body of 31-year-old pastor Matthew Winkler was found in his home, a victim of murder. The news became even more alarming as it was discovered that Matthew's wife, Mary, and their 3 young daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, had mysteriously disappeared. Matthew's absence from the evening church service at Christ Cathedral was very unusual. As a responsible person, he usually informed others if there were any changes to his plans, so his failure to attend was suspicious. The situation became more alarming when numerous phone calls to his family's home went unanswered. The neighbors decided to go to Matthew's house to find out what had happened and if they needed any help. From the outside, the house appeared normal, the windows and doors were intact, and there was nothing suspicious. Inside, there were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a rather loud television coming from one room. This shows that the homeowner is probably busy doing their own thing, but no one answered when they knocked on the front door. The door was locked, and subsequent phone calls also went unanswered. It was impossible for them to see inside through the curtained windows, leaving them unsure if anyone was actually present. Even though the situation appeared unusual, the neighbors did not call the police. Instead, they called an elder in the community, and he suggested finding a spare key to open the door. It took an additional hour and a half to find a key, but once they entered, they encountered a strange and unsettling atmosphere. The interior of the house was perfectly intact, with no signs of forced entry, but the owners were missing. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but this sense of normalcy changed when they entered the master bedroom. In Matthew and Mary's bedroom, they witnessed a horrifying sight. The pastor's Matthew body lay on the floor, in a large pool of blood. A massive gunshot wound had torn through his back, with blood splatters covering the surrounding area and dried, bloody foam on his face. The body had stiffened, indicating that it had been lying there for many hours. Matthew was still dressed in his pajamas, suggesting that he was likely shot in the morning. It was not until this time that the police officially received a call reporting this tragic incident. By the time the police arrived, a large crowd had gathered around the house, including neighbors, church members, and people passing by. However, the presence of this crowd caused big problems for the investigation. As they stood around, they unknowingly left behind fingerprints and inadvertently damaged or destroyed evidence, making it much harder for investigators to do their job. The police took the victim's, Matthew's body for a forensic examination, which revealed that he was shot once in the back with a large caliber gun. The wound caused massive blood loss, leading to his death just a few minutes later. Sadly, he was unable to call for help before succumbing to his injuries. It was impossible to confirm whether any strangers were in the house during the crime because the evidence was damaged by those who came before the police. The crime scene was unusual, and key witnesses seemed to have vanished. The whereabouts of the wife and daughters of Matthew remained a mystery. The police suspected that Mary and children might have been kidnapped or possibly murdered. In addition to their disappearance, the family's minivan was also missing from the garage. A large-scale search operation was initiated, prompting a yellow alert from the state, which signaled that children were missing. As a result, all citizens were asked to remain vigilant and assist in locating them. Mary's disappearance raised suspicions when her husband, Matthew, was found murdered in their home. Authorities worried that Mary and daughters might also be in danger and issued a notice searching for them. At first, police believed Mary was a victim due to her timid personality. However, as they dug deeper and collected more evidence, including financial information and witness statements from neighbors, the focus shifted, and Mary became the primary suspect in her husband's murder investigation, Matthew. It was essential to locate Mary as soon as possible and determine the whereabouts of the children, ensuring their safety. The family and their vehicle were immediately added to the missing list. Authorities also attempted to track Mary's bank card transactions and locate her using her mobile phone signal. Mary was discovered the next day in a resort town in Alabama, where she and her children were enjoying themselves at a local amusement park. It seemed as though she wanted to give her children a final, memorable experience, possibly because she knew she would soon be facing prison time. When the family was questioned at the police station, the two older daughters recounted the story with confidence. They explained that intruders had broken into their house, injured their father, and their mother had used a gun to protect them. They were then forced to flee to save their lives. According to the girls, their father was recovering in the hospital, and they expected to visit him soon and then return home. Patricia and Maria Eliza did not witness the incident that occurred in their house. Instead, they learned about them from their mother's account, Mary. All they knew was that they heard a gunshot and caught a glimpse of their father lying on the floor. Their mother quickly put them in the car and they drove away from the scene. Although Mary initially confessed, but then she stated that she couldn't recall the entire sequence of incident due to a temporary lapse in memory. Mary alleged that her husband, Matthew, had been emotionally and physically abusing her for years. He would often humiliate her and coerced her into having sex according to his will. Mary claimed it was Matthew who initially conceived the financial scam and she only did as he said. Matthew was known to have a short temper, would become enraged easily, and had a history of physical violence. His former secretary corroborated these allegations, stating that she frequently saw Matthew yell at his wife, who would bring him lunch at church, but he would always find fault with something she did. The evening before the murder, a heated argument broke out between Mary and her husband, Matthew, resulting in them spending the night in separate rooms. Mary was distraught and spent the entire night crying. The next morning, still distraught, she inadvertently picked up the loaded shotgun her husband kept in the house. With the gun in hand, she went to Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still in bed. He collapsed to the floor, bleeding profusely and gasping for air. He tried to speak and managed to whisper a single question to Mary, "Why?" In response, she simply said, "Sorry, so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house. Despite his attempt to call for help by reaching for the phone, Matthew didn't have the strength to make the call. The murder weapon was discovered in the trunk of the car Mary had used to transport the children. It remains unclear why she took it with her. At the trial, Mary was unable to provide an explanation. A key piece of evidence presented at the trial was the role-playing costumes found at Mary's residence. These pieces of evidence proved that Matthew had forced his sexual desires on his wife and how he had abused her. Mary's reaction upon seeing the costumes was striking. She initially turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite providing multiple, conflicting accounts of the events, the court ultimately concluded that she was a victim of domestic abuse. The court found that Mary's years of accumulated feelings of anger, resentment, and pain eventually led to the murder. Despite acknowledging her history of abuse, the court still held Mary accountable for her actions. In April 2007, the court reached its final decision. Mary Winkler was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state at the time has caused much controversy. Initially, it was anticipated that Mary would face a minimum prison sentence of 6 years. However, she was ultimately sentenced to less than 1 year. A portion of this sentence, Mary spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital where experts evaluated her mental fitness to regain custody of her children. Upon Mary's release in summer 2008, she was given custody of her daughter, who had been living with their paternal grandparents. However, Matthew's parents were outraged by this decision, as they firmly believed Mary was responsible for their son's death and felt Mary hadn't received an adequate punishment. They were further distressed by the thought of their granddaughter being cared for by the woman they thought had intentionally killed their son. Despite multiple attempts to appeal the custody decision, they were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, the fraud case against Mary was dropped, as the bank chose not to file formal charges and pursued the matter no further. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lisa Harum. Lisa Harum was born on June 12, 1981, in the Toronto suburbs of Canada. She was the second child in her family, raised by her single mother, Joanna, along with her older brother, Jason. The two siblings were extremely close, but their father's departure when they were very young left them with no memories of him. Growing up, Lisa was a lively and driven young girl with a strong passion for sports. She spent much of her childhood actively in various activities with her brother, including martial arts and team sports like soccer and volleyball. However, her true love was ballet. She spent hours each day at the dance studio, practicing rigorously. As she was naturally tall and slender from a young age, she initially seemed suited for ballet. Nevertheless, her professional ballet training required an extremely strict diet, which ultimately took a toll on her growing body. Lisa struggled with anorexia, an eating disorder, during her teenage years. She initially kept her condition a secret, believing she could handle the problem on her own. However, as her weight dropped to a critically low level, her mother intervened and admitted her to a clinic for treatment. Lisa spent several months in rehabilitation, focusing on regaining her health and weight. After completing her high school education, Lisa pursued her passion for dance and decided to explore a career in the beauty industry. Alongside her university studies, she worked as a perfumer for a large cosmetics chain. In her free time, she honed her makeup and hairdressing skills. In 2005, after celebrating his 24th birthday, Lisa felt an overwhelming desire for change. She wanted to leave Canada and move to Australia. Two primary reasons drove this decision. She craved a warmer climate and was eager to explore the world. To make the move possible, Lisa obtained a one-year work visa and traveled to Australia. Her mother accompanied her initially, staying for the first few months to ensure Lisa settled into her new surroundings. Once satisfied that her daughter was capable of taking care of herself, her mother returned to Toronto. Lisa made the decision to stay in Sydney permanently after her initial visa expired. To achieve this, she first extended her stay for another year. During this time, she gathered the necessary documents to apply for Australian citizenship. Outside of work, Lisa faces her own personal problems. Due to not having a father figure in her childhood, she often found herself attracted to older men. She often seeks concern from more mature men. Lisa's personal and professional life began to fall into place when she landed a job at a Sydney cosmetics company in 2006. She soon started dating a coworker who was nearly twice her age. As their relationship progressed, they decided to move in together, and Lisa relocated to his apartment. A few months later, they took the next step, and Lisa introduced her boyfriend to her mother and brother. And they accepted her choice. The couple traveled extensively, visiting destinations like the Seychelles and Paris, and even attending Rio de Janeiro's famous carnival. At one point, the man proposed to Lisa, and she happily accepted. However, their engagement was short-lived. About a year later, the couple broke up. While Lisa didn't reveal the specific reasons for their split, but she hinted that their age difference was a major factor. In 2010, Lisa completed her education at the Sydney College of Stylists. She secured a job as a hairdresser at a well-known beauty salon, where she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her clients. During this time, Lisa starts dating a new boyfriend. However, it came to a swift end when she discovered he was married. As she didn't want to damage someone else's family, she ended the relationship promptly. Before the breakup, he introduced Lisa to a businessman named Simon Gitney at a party. Unfortunately, this introduction had severe consequences for Lisa. Simon Gitney was born in December 1973 in Maryland to an immigrant family from Lebanon who held strong religious beliefs. His parents raised Simon and his 5 siblings with a firm hand. Despite this, Simon struggled with managing his emotions from a young age, frequently experiencing intense anger outbursts and displaying possessive tendencies. He could not stand rejection and often resorted to violence. Simon's behavior eventually landed him in trouble with the law. Simon's first experience in jail occurred when he was 18 years old. He showed up at his ex-girlfriend's workplace and began harassing her, prompting the store owner to intervene and throw him out. Undeterred, Simon returned with friends and attacked the store owner. Simon physically assaulted him. As a result, Simon was jailed, but only served a short sentence and was eventually released on bail due to good behavior. 3 years later, Simon was arrested again, this time for robbery. Then he resisted arrest. A physical altercation broke out and he bit off part of a police officer's ear. This act put him at risk of a serious prison sentence. Fortunately, the pastor of his family's church intervened on his behalf, which led to Simon serving only a year and a half in prison. Years later, in 2000, Simon got into trouble with the law once more. He was arrested for possessing and distributing illegal substances. Despite the severity of the crime, but he received a relatively lenient sentence and served only 2 years. After his release, Simon appeared to turn his life around. He relocated to Sydney and co-founded a successful luxury women's shoe business with some friends. The business generated a substantial and steady income, quickly making Simon wealthy. He purchased a luxurious home in an upscale neighborhood and a high-end vehicle. Simon made a concerted effort to conceal his troubled past from those around him, including roommates and romantic partners. Simon and Lisa had exchanged numbers at a party, and he soon followed up with a call. They started with casual conversations, but over time these talks developed into a romance. In January 2010, Lisa confided in Simon about her dissatisfaction with her current living situation. She expressed a desire to rent an apartment in a different neighborhood. Simon generously offered her a temporary place to stay in his luxury apartment, rent-free, while she searched for a new home. Despite initial reservations from Lisa's mother, Joanna, Lisa reassured her that the arrangement was temporary and that she and Simon were just friends. At the time, Lisa assumed Simon was gay because he takes great care of his looks and used piercings, but this assumption proved to be incorrect. For the initial 2 months, Simon maintained a reserved distance from Lisa. They lived in separate rooms, and there wasn't even a hint of intimacy between them. However, but over time, they became closer, the so-called spark burned, and they started dating. When they began dating, Simon was 37 and Lisa was 28. To Lisa, Simon seemed perfect, charming, sociable, and generous. He frequently surprised her with gifts and pleasant experiences, causing her to see him as a prince in a fairy tale. As a couple, they began attending social events together, especially at an elite sports club that Simon frequents. Lisa genuinely believed she had found her soulmate and was convinced that she would spend the rest of her life happily with Simon. She happily shared her feelings with her mother, brother, and friends, but she remained oblivious to the fact that her fairy tale would soon come to an end. 6 months into their relationship, Simon's behavior began to shift in subtle ways that Lisa didn't notice at first. Unaware of the manipulation, she thinks that Simon is doing everything just for her good. However, he slowly isolated her from her friends and family, disregarded her personal boundaries, and attempted to alter her perspectives, tastes, and behavior to align with his own desires. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa's 29th birthday, Simon started pressuring her to leave her job at the beauty salon. He said that she wasn't appreciated there and she could find a higher-paying job elsewhere. However, Lisa enjoyed her work and had many loyal clients. She was also satisfied with her income and didn't see a reason to quit, so she refused Simon's suggestion. Simon was not satisfied with Lisa's decision. In August, he took drastic action. He showed up at her salon, causing a huge scandal, forcing her to quit. Despite Lisa was shocked and disappointed by Simon's behavior, but he convinced her that she no longer needed to work, as his income would be enough to support them both comfortably. He reassured her that they could afford anything they wanted and live a life of luxury. A month and a half later, Simon and Lisa moved into a high-end apartment on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. Unbeknownst to Lisa, the apartment was filled with hidden surveillance cameras, allowing Simon to monitor her every move. He further tightened his grip on her by giving her a smartphone and laptop that he had pre-installed with spyware. The spyware enabled Simon to track Lisa's messages, emails, calls, and movements. He also gained access to her social media accounts, which he manipulated by deleting posts and photos, reading her private correspondence, and controlling her friend list. As time passed, Simon's control over Lisa grew, but he cleverly made it seem as though she was making her own decisions. In reality, he had invaded every aspect of her life, leaving her with no sense of privacy. Simon exerted control over Lisa's appearance by prohibiting her from wearing cosmetics, deeming her makeup too bold and unrefined. He also purchased unflattering clothing in dark colors, discarding her existing wardrobe due to its revealing nature, which he believed would attract unwanted male attention. Lisa's movements were restricted as well. Simon would only allow her to leave the apartment if he accompanied her, and even then, they only visited places he had selected. He also barred her from going to the gym, instead buying her expensive exercise equipment for home use, citing this as a suitable alternative. Simon's control extended to Lisa's social life, causing her to lose connections on social media. As her online connections dwindled, Simon eventually convinced her to delete her accounts altogether. Lisa had lost touch with her friends, and her interactions were under constant surveillance. The only people she was allowed to communicate with were her mother and brother, with Simon's permission. When Christmas 2010 approached, Lisa planned a trip home to Canada to spend the holiday with her family. Initially, Simon intended to join her, but then because he was busy with work, he couldn't go with her. Despite his reservations, Lisa persuaded him to let her travel alone, as she had not seen her loved ones in over a year. Simon eventually agreed, but only on the condition that she adhere to a strict set of rules he had established for her trip. Her brother Jason and her mother, Joanna, were shocked by the transformation in Lisa over the past year. Gone was the bright and cheerful beauty she once was. Her appearance had changed in every way. Without makeup, her face was barely recognizable. Her luxurious hair is tied into a ponytail and hidden under a headpiece. Her clothes were now baggy, unflattering, and black. However, it was not just her physical appearance that was alarming. Lisa's behavior had also changed significantly. She would flinch with anxiety every time the phone rang and rush to answer it instantly. This was because Simon had made it a condition for her. She had to be available to answer his calls at any time, no matter what she was doing. Lisa always stayed at her mother's house, refused to see her friends, and almost never went out, causing her mother Joanna to become extremely concerned. Joanna decided it was time to have an honest conversation with Lisa to understand why she was behaving this way. During this conversation, Lisa broke down in tears and confessed that her boyfriend Simon constantly monitored her activities, knowing who she associated with, who she talked to on the phone, and what they discussed. Lisa also revealed that Simon controlled many aspects of her life, forbidding her from working, seeing friends, going to the gym, or have any preferences. As a result, she had lost touch with all of her friends. Lisa's mother was shocked and urged her to stay in Canada, pointing out that she had no ties in Australia. However, Lisa was resolute, explaining that she loved Simon and didn't want to end their relationship. She believed their issues were temporary, given they'd only been together for less than a year, and that he would eventually calm down and become less controlling. Lisa was also convinced that Simon genuinely cared for her and wanted the best for her. Despite her family's concerns and efforts to persuade her that the relationship was unhealthy, Lisa decided to return to Australia to be with Simon. Lisa tried to ease her mother's concerns by telling her that Simon cared for her and wouldn't cause her harm. However, when Lisa went back, things took a turn for the worse. Simon restricted her from leaving their apartment and even demanded that she avoid eye contact with other men when they were out in public, insisting she keep her gaze on the ground. Furthermore, Simon started referring to Lisa by her middle name, Cecilia, because he thought it sounded more polite that way. In the spring of 2011, Lisa started experiencing pain in her leg due to an old ballet injury from her youth. Instead of taking her to a hospital, Simon arranged for a female physical therapist to visit their home 3 times a week to treat her with massages. Over time, the therapist became Lisa's closest friend and confidant, someone she trusted and shared her difficult situation with. On June 12, Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon organized a party at Sydney's most expensive restaurant, but the guest list only included his own family and close friends. Lisa was not given the opportunity to invite any of her own friends or acquaintances. As the evening came to a close, Simon surprised her by proposing and placing a ring on her finger. Lisa accepted, but her reaction was not what would have been expected. Instead of tears of happiness, she began crying tears of desperation and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother to share the news of her engagement, but her excitement quickly turned to worry as she began to sob on the phone. However, her mother, Joanna, was far from thrilled. Joanna immediately expressed her disapproval of the engagement and urged Lisa to end the relationship and return to Canada as soon as possible. Lisa pleaded with her mother to stop discussing the matter over the phone, because Simon might be eavesdropping on their conversation. Lisa tries to distract herself with thoughts about their upcoming wedding. However, when she tried to discuss the plans with Simon, he abruptly interrupted her and declared that he would make all the decisions, including choosing the venue, buying her wedding dress, and creating the guest list. This left Lisa feeling devastated and powerless. Feeling lost, she confided in her physiotherapist during a visit, confessing that she couldn't continue in the relationship but felt trapped because Simon wouldn't allow her to leave. Lisa and the masseuse devised a secret plan. Each time the masseuse visited, Lisa discreetly gave her some of her possessions for safekeeping, making sure Simon didn't suspect a thing. On July 28, Simon left his laptop behind in the rush, an unusual mistake since he always carried it with him. Seizing the opportunity, Lisa accessed the laptop and discovered her worst fears. She found a spyware program that allowed Simon to monitor all the data from her phone. Lisa was discovered recordings of her conversations with her mother and surveillance footage from cameras in every room of their apartment. Fearing for her well-being, Lisa used the masseuse's phone to call her mother and ask her to get on the next flight to her apartment and take she home. However, Joanna was unable to leave work immediately, as she had to arrange a shift swap with a colleague. Joanna would later deeply regret the delay this. Upon returning home, Simon quickly discovered that Lisa had accessed his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa broke down in tears, struggling to understand why she deserved to be treated this way. However, Simon justified his actions, saying they were for her own good. The following day, July 29th, a heated conversation took place between Simon and Lisa, which was later presented in court as evidence. During this conversation, Lisa became emotional and asked if she could go home. In contrast, Simon remained calm and spoke with confidence, assuring her that returning home was not an option. He then told Lisa to calm down and suggested that she had mental issues. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa woke up early, dressed neatly, and put papers and necessary items in her purse. Before leaving, she locked herself in the bathroom to make a disturbing phone call to her mother. During the call, Lisa said her mother that if anything were to happen to her, her fiancé, Simon, would be responsible. Lisa's intention was to exit the apartment without waking Simon, but she was unsuccessful. The indents that followed are unclear, and the incident details remain a mystery. However, neighbors reported hearing a scream in the hallway, which stopped abruptly before they could react. Just 1 minute later, a young woman, later confirmed to be Lisa, fell from the balcony of the 15th floor in her fatal crash to the ground below. She landed on the ground, where she died instantly from her severe injuries. Several people on the street saw this happen, but it occurred so quickly that they didn't have time to fully understand the situation. However, one eyewitness, a man who was walking his dog nearby, provided more details. He said that he heard a noise and looked up to see a man holding something large. This man then dropped the object, which turned out to be Lisa. 3 minutes later, Simon, dressed in his pajamas, ran into the street, overcome with tears. He expressed despair about his future, insisting he had been too late to stop Lisa. Initially, the situation seemed like an accident, but Simon swiftly contradicted this assumption, announced that Lisa had ended her own life. Further investigation revealed a cryptic note in Simon's pocket and a disturbing video recording further complicated the situation. After the body Lisa was brought to the morgue and examined, some clues have been found. Upon searching the pockets, investigators found fragments of a torn note containing the message, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." It's likely that Lisa had broken the note into small pieces and scattered them across different pockets to prevent Simon from finding them. Further investigation revealed that the apartment indeed had multiple cameras, but the hard drive containing the footage was missing. However, Simon maintained that there were no video recordings at all. A surveillance camera in the apartment's hallway recorded a disturbing scene. Approximately 1 minute before Lisa's fatal fall, the footage shows her desperately running out of the apartment and calling for help. However, Simon quickly grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and forcibly drags her back inside. This incident is believed to be connected to the scream heard by the neighbors. Investigators also discovered evidence on Simon's laptop, including a recorded conversation he and Lisa had the night before her death, as well as spyware software he used to secretly monitor her activities. Simon stated that he and Lisa had a disagreement that morning, resulting in her becoming hysterical. She initially fled to the hallway, screaming, but he calmed her down by bringing her back inside, fearing a scene in front of the neighbors. Moments later, as Simon was about to call Lisa's mother on the phone, Lisa went out to the balcony and fell. Simon claimed that Lisa once mentioned ending her own life, but he had not taken her threat seriously. He explained that his decision to install spyware was largely driven by his genuine concern for Lisa's well-being and safety. During the trial, Simon was accompanied by his new girlfriend, Rachel Louise, 22 years old, a model who bore a striking resemblance to Lisa. However, it was later suggested that Rachel simply wanted to make a name for herself through this case, so she was willing to talk to the press and appear on television, claiming Simon would never harm a woman. Meanwhile, Simon's lawyers presented a defense that suggested Lisa had a history of mental health struggles, including anxiety and anorexia, for which she had received treatment at a clinic. They imply that these things were the cause of her death. The defense argued that Simon was of short stature, so he could not have lifted Lisa himself, because she was taller than him, thus he would not have been able to throw her off the balcony. However, a trainer from Simon's gym disputed this claim, stating that Simon lifts heavy weights, so he is much stronger than he looks and can easily lift Lisa. This assertion was supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and glass barrier, suggesting she could not have jumped on her own as she would have needed to lean on them. The physiotherapist who had treated Lisa took the stand, providing crucial testimony about the abuse Lisa had suffered and the items she had left behind in an attempt to escape. This testimony played a crucial role in the trial. As a result, Simon Gidney was convicted of murdering his fiancée, Lisa Harum, and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Following the verdict, Rachel Louise became enraged, insulting the judge, and was subsequently removed from the courtroom. Simon and his lawyers made multiple attempts to contest the court's ruling, but they were unsuccessful, and the original verdict stood. Following the verdict, Rachel broke up with Simon. She said in an interview that they found it difficult to maintain a relationship because he was in prison, although she continues to believe in Simon's innocence.